All right, how's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the LaviCast, and I'm here with my fellow co-host IanWaffles. Say hello to everybody.
Hey, everybody. Good to have me. Thank you for having me back, I should say. It is also good to be back.
Oh, of course. All right, so today I am actually going to be playing a bit of the co-host role this time, and Waffles here is going to be leading us through a little discussion he's been building up for a while. So, Waffles, if you would.
Yeah, of course. So on this channel, oftentimes we talk about Ian Flynn and his writing, mostly talking about the negatives with his run on IDW in particular. Sometimes we throw in a little bit of Reboot in there, but for the most part, it's an IDW kind of critique analysis most of the time when it comes to Ian Flynn and his writing. And of course, the reason we talk about Ian Flynn, he's the main writer. He's the one everybody knows as far as kind of the English side, at least for good reasons. People know Ken Penders for bad, and stuff like that. So Flynn is he's been working on the comics since 2006, and I've been following his work since probably around 2010. 2010. And so, and I've been a fan of his work since that time and have been following since. And so I wanted to basically sort of track his rise and fall, if you will, because according to me, and obviously Lavi Ray as well, we don't really like where his stuff has gone currently. But I myself, since I've been there since the beginning and have really fell in love with his work, especially in recent years, whenever I kind of came back to his work on Preboot and some of Reboot, I found that was a lot of good to his writing that I don't think people really talk about. And I think a lot of the things that people actually praise his writing for are the things that I don't really like about it. And so I just kind of want to track his progression as a Sonic the Hedgehog comic writer, and also just how that eventually evolved into him just kind of being a writer in general for this comic, and what we can track about any of his work. I don't really want to do any speculating on like what are his credentials, like is he, does he deserve to be writing the comics, because he like basically like got right out of college and basically got the job or whatever. None of that really matters. If you're good, you're good. That's all I care about. And I don't really care about any of like, what are his values on those types of things. I just want to know what are his pros, what are his cons. We can discuss those other things in time, but for now, I just kind of want to focus on what was his mindset going into writing these comics and what is also the result, because at the end of the day, the results are what matter. So, and then I've just got Lavi right here because obviously we like discussing this stuff. But I really wanted to create this kind of PowerPoint where we could have like a bunch of different examples on screen and kind of really like show the receipts. So yeah, first of all, does that all sound good to you?
Yes, it does. Let's get started.
Good. All right. So first off, real quick, I just want to recap a little bit of what Archie was like before Flynn came on, because for Preboot especially, it is a comic where basically every writer was basically just kind of stacking on what anyone came before. And so when Flynn comes into the story, he is not creating a new story. He was literally offered the ability to. He was offered the ability to reboot the story and kind of get his own run. But he said, no, I really love this comic. I really love what came before. And so I want to add to it. So when we're talking about what Flynn does in the Preboot era, I want to establish like what he is pulling from, because one of the things that people really admire about Flynn is that he pulls from what came before, and that is especially true with Archie. So I just wanted to kind of go into that. From the get-go, people will talk about how Archie was a mix of SatAM and Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. So basically it had the characters of SatAM, so like Robotnik and Sally and all the Freedom Fighters, but it had the tone of Adventures, which is very goofy and silly. But what's kind of underestimated is this is from the original miniseries, so this isn't even like the original comic run. This is like right before it when they were kind of advertising it. From the get-go, on the left you have like the goofy little like, oh, I've a Robotnik. I'm the valedictorian of the Mojo Kubert School of Supervillainy, and I only get one lousy cameo. Next time I'll avenge this humiliation. All this goofy stuff. Sonic and Tails come in at the end are like, all right, like let's end this stupid comic. But in the same little miniseries, you have things like Sonic talk, and you have Sonic talking to the audience and be like, hey kids, I'm going to show you our secret hideout and all that stuff. But then at the bottom you have the fact that Sonic he's got his Uncle Chuck and his dog. They're being brainwashed. Robotnik has polluting the atmosphere, and there's an army of robots. So when you think of something like, let's say, Kim Possible, or I don't know, Perry the Platypus fighting Dr. Doofenshmirtz. If you really think about it, hey, you could think like, oh man, this animal is fighting like this evil, guy who wants to like destroy people or maybe hurt people if his plans go his way. But it's really goofy and silly. And at the end of the day, Perry gets to come home and be a pet. Or Kim Possible, she fights people who want to take over the world or maybe kill people, but it's goofy. And at the end of the day, she can literally just go back to high school and nobody gives a crap that she's a superhero, right? That's kind of different though with what SatAM or what the comics were doing, is that no, Sonic and friends, even though they're taking this very lightly and goofy, they have to go home to like a secret base. Their family and friends are gone. The world is polluted. So even though the story is really goofy, it still keeps from the get-go that we're going to get serious with this. And so moving on, eventually the comic would have this kind of thing where you would have an A story, like the one on the left, where you have this goofy little wedding. And then in the B story, the comic would start to get really dark. So instead of these kind of being undertones or something that you kind of think about, now we have a story where literally we meet the mentor of Sally, and she dies. She dies on screen, and we have a whole kind of story about that. And so then as the comic progressed, we got way more into the darker side because the comic wanted to lean more into Sad AM and what it was going for, because that was what kids found more compelling. That's what the writers wanted to lean into. And so now you have this image on your screen, this lovely image of Robotnik with that is basically melted human flesh on his face, boiling, because Robotnik, as we know, is a Robotnik from another timeline who killed everyone on his planet, including an older Sonic and Sally and their 2 children. And he basically came to our world to torture and torment our Sonic because he got bored. And one of the ways in which he wanted to do that, he wanted to pretend he was the original Robotnik. And so the way he is revealed is that acid falls on his face. And that, again, right there, that is supposed to depict human flesh melting off his face, whatever he's using for it. But that's the visual they're going for. It's very gross. Like the detail is crazy. And so now we get to this beautiful spread. We have on the top, we have alien races being wiped out on screen. And the way it's talked about is these people, they could not comprehend their fate before the final process began. 15 solid minutes before there were mere rocks. About the time, it takes 15 minutes to strap the Earth of its metals. 15 minutes before mere rock remains. About the time it takes to eat a meal. So not only are we showing like death and destruction or whatever, we're like doing it in like this eloquent poetry way where we have this idea of like, oh, it's like eating a meal or whatever. Because you could also think of something like Avatar. Avatar has a genocide. It has all these different things. And when they want to focus on that, they really go into it. And that kind of leaves an impact on you. So this comic sort of does the same thing, but it does it just in really visceral ways. I mean, you're looking at Bunny right there. That is not pleasant to look at. I don't know about you, Love.
It is not.
On the left, we have Monkey Khan, who is being injected with robotic body parts as he is turned from flesh into a cyborg, and he's basically just sitting on the table in agony. On the bottom left, we have all the romance stuff that Ken Penders and a lot of the writers wanted to put in because they wanted to appeal to a teenage audience. So we have the implication that evil Sonic and Bunny banged. How? I don't know, but that's the implication. That's what they were going for. And then on the bottom right, you have basically hundreds of people who are in these little pods. And if you don't know what these pods do, you can see it has energy drain and mind erasure. One's at 99, the other's at 87%. So yeah, all these people are dead. And what Robotnik uses these for is he drains the life out of you, poisons your body, and then he uses your husk to power his city. Because that's just what Robotnik does because he's the devil.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead. Do you have any questions? So far?
Oh no, you're good. You're good. I'm just not in agreement, man. Keep going.
Yeah. So I wanted to put all this out here of like, this is what Ian Flynn is coming into the book with. And as an example of sort of the stories that would be told during this time, during the gag era, which is on the right, there was a story about Robotnik making this robot named Eve. And this robot would basically like, it was supposed to grow and evolve and try to defeat Sonic. But eventually Sonic talks it down and is like, hey, if you really want to go beyond your programming, you should be your own person. And so at the end, it flies off into space. It looks like this weird creature, says, farewell, Sonic the Hedgehog, and thank you. Because of you, I know what it means to be free, just as importantly, to be me. Wow, that's really uplifting. That's really nice. Sure, we've got all that fucked up stuff, right here. But the story's still willing to have like good messages. And the comic does consistently still have good messages, even as the comic gets darker. The characters have a lot of personality. They don't really lose that kind of like energy they have. The comic doesn't get like morbid in the sense of it leans into being miserable. It just more so leans into the idea of like, it's going to put these things front and center and it's going to like depict them in like really gruesome ways because the artists are always doing a crazy good job. And so there's a contrast there where the comic never forgets that the whole point of the story is that we're living in a war. These characters are fighting a really crazy, hopeless fight, and they're dealing with very like more adult themed emotions, that a teenager would feel at those times. And so in this case, we have this gag issue. And what is the story that comes out of this? Well, later on in the darker era of the comic, we find out that Eve went on to explore the stars, and basically a bunch of people were like, you're a freak, we're gonna kill you because we don't know what you are. And so basically she was shunned, she was chased off by alien species and all these things. And so she realized like, like me, I'm like a robot creature, basically. Other robots are used as kind of like property or like things like that. So she started basically destroying planets and liberating the robots that inhabited there. And so then Sonic tells her basically like, well, okay, well, if you do that, Like now they're just, one, you've killed a bunch of people, and two, how is that any better? Because now they're just a part of you, like they're not sentient, they're not free like you are. And Eve is like, damn, Sonic, you're right. I'm gonna kill myself. And so she kills herself. And that's the story. The story is that Sonic set this creature free, told her to be herself, and the writers basically were like, ooh, wouldn't it be really funny if the end result of that is that this was a bad thing, and then that's it. A lot of people died, and so did the perpetrator. The end. That's the story. So this is the kind of stuff that the Archie Sonic comics were doing. Why they were doing this? Most of the time, it was basically just because they didn't really have anything to do. The Sonic comic was basically just kind of spinning its wheels. But then we have the other side of this, which is, again, Ken Penders, one of the biggest things he introduced was basically just really exploring Knuckles. And by the end of his run with Knuckles, he was exploring what does it mean to be a parent? What does it mean to lose a parent to basically like a disease? What does it mean to watch your child grow up? And then obviously on the right, the artists were just like, yeah, let's just put basically human anatomically correct echidna lady on screen. And there you go. Like they're just getting changed in the morning, like two adults. That's just in the comic now. So, so like Ken was really leaning into these ideas along with the melodrama, and then as well, Carl Bowler's leaning into a lot of the crazier ideas, or just trying to be wacky and goofy and do whatever they wanted to do. They just needed to make sales, basically. So we also have this right here. This is an infamous image. This is right before Flynn came onto the book. We have a story of Sonic, this cover of Sonic just crying in the corner or whatever. And then finally, I just wanted to show you that these are our protagonists. There is not a single character in this screen right here that is duplicated. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 characters on screen who were basically the central focus of the comic, allegedly. You have the Freedom Fighters, you have the Chaotix, and then you had the Brain Trust, which would include like Tommy and Uncle Chuck, and they were consistently around. You have Snively, and then Shadow is getting a lot of focus too. So basically what you have at this point is a comic that is spinning its wheels, a comic that has a billion characters who it isn't really doing anything with, other than basically making each other miserable. The Chaotix are just kind of chilling out, and Knuckles has really a lot of issues with his dad and his family. Shadow is just kind of aimlessly wandering around looking for a purpose. Sonic is miserable because he's not with Sally. Sally's miserable because she's always miserable. Antoine isn't even around for most of the time, so when he comes back, he's basically a new character. He's been gone for like 30 issues. Fiona Fox is there. You have this stuff right here. These are other little subplots. You have Elias coming back. You have Evil Sonic. You have the Atom subplot. You have Tails hating Sonic and never resolving that. You have Shadow working for Eggman and all this stuff. So all this stuff is happening, and none of it's going anywhere because the point of the comic was not really to have a overarching story anymore. Because what would the overarching story be? The overarching story would be to defeat Robotnik. That's the whole point. We're in a giant war. We want to defeat Eggman. But because the comic has so thoroughly doubled down on like we have to go on forever and it doesn't know what to do, Eggman just kind of stops appearing or doing anything. And so the comic is just content to just be like, oh, I don't know, like the Freedom Fighters just kind of chill out and they don't do anything. And meanwhile, sometimes bad things happen and then we go back to normal and there's drama. So this is all what you need to know right before Flynn comes onto the book, and why when Flynn comes onto the book, his values as a writer, I think, really come into play. So now we're on to Flynn. I just want to ask you, Lav, if you had any questions about all that stuff that came before.
No, I just want to say put a pin in that because I want to come back around to that when we get to IDW, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you can write that down if you don't want to forget.
Yeah,
So yeah. So that's all the stuff we have. So now we come to the Flynn era, and this right here, this is like the Darkest Storm arc, which is like he put all these 3 covers together. And this arc right here was one of the first ones that Flynn did, and it basically resolved like 30 plot setups or whatever, or plot holes or plot devices, things like that. Basically like 30 of them, I think someone counted. And the way it was able to do that is because Flynn came into this kind of book, his big strength as a writer that everyone kind of compliments on him is he's able to take previous ideas and use something for them. But the big thing that he does in Preboot that I think he doesn't get enough credit for is his ability to stack these ideas. So it's not just like, oh, we're not just going to bring back the Chaos Emeralds or whatever, because in Archie Sonic, the Chaos Emeralds are they're just millions of them. So we want to get the 7 ones from the game. So it's not just that, oh, they become the 7 emeralds. The way he does this is he ties it into the prophecy that Tails was supposed to fulfill that the writers beforehand didn't do anything with. And when we fulfill that prophecy, it's this big elaborate anime duel or whatever with Adam in the sky. And then when they go to the special zone, Flynn remembered, hey, wasn't there like a weird panda guy in there? What if he got all that energy and basically became a god, and he's this guy who likes games? So now we can use the games from the special zones in the video games. And so now when Sonic and friends need to get the Chaos Emeralds, they are doing games to get them, like in the game, like in the video games. But you have a character who represents that. So one, they can't just get them all for free, but two, it ties it into Archie. So it's not just a game thing. It ties into a character, and it ties into the history, and it reshapes something. Then you have all the things he's doing with Evil Sonic, where he turns him into Scourge and gives him like this identity crisis. You have all the stuff with Shadow, where he finally gives Shadow a way to go to with his character. You have Antoine dealing with the loss of his father. And if you notice everything on screen, a lot of these things deal with very human emotions like loss, or regaining loved ones, or being able to like find new people you care about. And I think that's what Flynn really was able to do here, is that since he was a fan of this comic and he cared about these characters, and the comic was basically just a melodrama at this point, he was able to look at that and go, okay, what would I want to see, and what do people want to see? Well, they want to see these characters grow. They want to see them come back together. A lot of them had spent time apart, like Sonic and Sally or whatever, or Bunny and Antoine getting married for the first time, or Fiona kind of becoming her own character, or Snively. We have this scene where he finally shows a bit of heart of the fact that he can care for someone. That's a new layer. Sonic and Tails, all these different things. So the thing that I think Flynn was just super, super good at during his run was basically just taking all these ideas that came before and just stacking it all on top of each other and giving it just a really human core. Because at the end of the day, what the story is about is that these characters are living in a war and they are trying to survive. And so each of these stories has to deal with that. The one on the left has to deal with the fact of, what if Eggman is defeated? Okay, well then that would be a power vacuum and we'd have to deal with that. And then if we do that, we have to deal with these other people and these other nations and all these things. The one in the middle is the Knuckles story. That ties together all of Knuckles' history, and it ties in together of like Knuckles being seen as a tool and his relationship with his father, and Sonic being the one to be the light to bring him out of it. The one on the right is the Secret Freedom Fighters, and talking about like, okay, what if we bring all the people together, but now like there's infighting and there's these things of like people being afraid and they don't really know what to do. And then you have Elias, who doesn't want to be king, but now he has to be a shadow king. He has to protect his people, even though they don't want him to protect them. And you have Silver, who's trying to protect the future, but to do that, he has to go to the past, and he has to basically grow as a person and try to help a traitor instead of destroy a traitor. So all of these things, these details that come from the story or come from the games, like Silver having a traitor, or the Ken Penders lore, he always finds a very human story to pull out of it that ties into just the grand narrative of like, this is just a never-ending war. And the biggest thing he always comes to with these types of things, and we'll go back to those other ones because I'm already on this point, is the big thing he always leans on is that you can't do it alone. Oftentimes in a lot of stories, you'll have characters who the whole point of them is that they get stronger because of the people believing in them, or they are kind of the front runner, and then they have people who support them from behind or alongside them. Flynn doesn't really usually do that ever. Most of the time, he does like a few times. The main thing he likes to rely on is the idea of like, you go through tragedy, you go through hardship, and you don't know what to do. And the thing you can do is rely on your friends to basically help you through that. Not to give you the power to win, but like literally be there as like right by your side trying to win. So with Shadow, we have his thing of like being a failure, and him being like, oh, it's okay to be a failure now because I'm growing to be a hero, and I can do that by relying on other people, which he doesn't want to do. Sonic, when they defeat Eggman, the whole point is that since we have all these characters, we have 1 billion characters, the whole point is that, oh, Sonic can't just beat Eggman on his own. If he could, then this wouldn't be a war, would it? So he has the Freedom Fighters. The Freedom Fighters are able to back him up when he's not strong enough. And then on the right, you have Knuckles dealing with the loss of his dad, and how whenever that happens, he tries to isolate himself. He tries to be on his own, but then he realizes like, no, I shouldn't be doing my duties alone. I have people who I care about, and they are willing to stand by my side. And so those are all the things that Flynn is really, really good at. And I just have a few quick examples. This one is just one of a cool example of Flynn just stacking on ideas. So what you have right here is Silver the Hedgehog going into an alternate reality that was established by Ken Penders for like 2 issues, where an alternate version of Knuckles' daughter is from a dystopian future where her dad is turned into an evil villain. This is all stuff Penders established, and then he just dropped it. So Flynn went, okay, what if we sent Silver there? Silver's whole story is that he wants to protect the future. So what if he goes to another destroyed future and he saves that one? But how does he save that future? Does he just defeat the bad guy? Well, no. Instead, what he does is he teams up with Knuckles' daughter, who uses the Sword of Acorns to defeat this person. And instead of using raw power, which is, his psychic powers, he uses the fact that, oh, wait, I'm not the strongest one. There are people who are stronger than me. The way I need to grow and learn is basically not just like hit things. I need to use my brain. And so he uses Enerjak's power against him. He's thinking outside the box. And then the way he defeats that is that he takes what he's learned from Mammoth Mogul and Edmund, who is one of Knuckles' descendants, and he defeats Enerjak. Well, what do you know? The comic never brings this up, but if you think about it, you go, oh, wait a second. Who were the people who defeated Enerjak before? It was Mammoth Mogul and Edmund, the actual brother of Enerjak. And so Flynn ties all these things together, and then the Sword of Acorns, which Knuckles' daughter uses. So you have all these little details that are stacking onto each other that just add so much emotional weight to where this isn't just resolving a future storyline or a past storyline. It's also giving Silver a character arc, and it's also giving redemption to previous storylines and kind of emotionally carrying on those characters and letting them have a victory, even if Silver doesn't realize they're getting a victory. And then as far as character goes, I always think that Flynn, though, like I said, what he's really good at is the character moments. So this one right here, this pretty late, but it's basically Mighty is going after his sister Matilda, and Matilda does not remember because she was basically a baby when she was captured and roboticized. Again, Dark World. So whenever they finally find her, we have this this thing where Ray is like, hey, like he says, Tilly, you're his sister. So he says, the Baron agrees. I suppose it's true then. Then let's go. We'll rescue your brother and we'll all go home. And then she says, I have no home. I have no feelings for this brother. Do what you want, but leave me alone. So we have this character who basically feels dead inside. She doesn't know what to do. She's gone through all this strife. And then Mighty is basically just like, I don't know what to do. She doesn't remember anything, and he's feeling hopeless. And so Ray, the person who basically looks up to Mighty, goes, do you know how long he looked for you? How much it hurt him to think you were dead or gone forever? You may not remember him, but he remembers you. He loves you. I was lost too, didn't age right, and with no one left to call family. Mighty took me in, and thanks to him, I've got a life now. He wants the same for you. So you have this where it's like basically he's just telling her like, oh, get over it, basically. But then you get to the actual core of it, which is he goes, you don't remember him. So what? You remember what it was like to be alone, right? Scared? He won't ever leave you alone again. How can you not want that? And so basically it goes into that thing where it actually brings her memories back. So instead of it being like, oh, she wants to be with Mighty, it's seeing this other person who has that same feeling, makes her remember like, oh yeah, the reason I'm so bottled up inside is that I was hurt. And I do remember the person who did care about me, and I do want someone to care about me. And then that gives her memories back, and she gets her family back. And then now they're a found family unit. And then this is just a different example of this, which is basically that Monkey Khan wants to destroy Nicole, because this is during the story where Nicole has been brainwashed. And during the story, the Sonic and Sally go into the computer because they want to basically like snap her out of it. And while they're in there, things aren't looking good. And Monkey Khan, he has been brainwashed before, and he's only like half mechanical. So his whole point is basically like Sonic and Sally are going to get murdered while they're inside there. And meanwhile, a lot of people are going to get hurt too. And if Nicole kills her friends, I already went through that. I will not let her go through that. So I'm going to basically put her out of her misery. And so he goes to do that. And Tails is like, are you a fucking asshole? What is your problem? And so like he goes into his, Monkey Kong goes into his whole thing of like, it's not easy for me. It does, but it has to be done. Basically, he thinks that by doing this for her, he's doing what he wished someone had done for him, put him out of his misery, and basically make it so no one has to get hurt, no one has to be killed. And so then you have Tails' speech, which is really good. He goes, no, it doesn't. We're heroes. We do what's right, even when it's hard. It isn't a matter of being hard, Tails. It's impossible. Was it impossible to save Bunny? Was it impossible to save you? No, but nothing is impossible. If it was really so hopeless, why did you come here at all? Why don't you just zap me and get it over with? I don't want to have to destroy her. Then wait and see what Sonic and Sally can do. Or do you not believe in them either? And then Monkey Khan lands on the really great line. You make it sound like it's so simple, but and then it stops. So the whole story, or this whole little just two exchange, is basically just Tails leaning into the idea of what people really like about him is that he believes in Sonic and he believes in his friends. But he goes about it. He's really at him. He's like, okay, if you think it's so hopeless, take me down. Strike me down right now. Do it. Prove it that you have no hope left in you. And then basically just pointing it out of like, just believe in your friends. Just do it. And he's like, it can't be that simple. But... And then he stops, and then they wait for Sonic and Sally save the day. And so Tails, through this really like intense circumstance, proves to Monkey Khan that yes, it's actually okay to believe in people, because Monkey Khan, all his people have been wiped out. He's been used to kill people, all these different things. So now he has been brought hope by Tails, who is basically putting him in his place. And so you have these really good all this going around. So that's the main. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just safely assume that's foreshadowing for later?
Yes. Yeah. So we've got this going on. So So those are the main things that I think Flynn is good. These are just rapid fire, and we'll go into Reboot basically. This is just a small one. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's just comedy. I think Flynn is really good at comedy during Preboot. This image kind of sells it all. You have these goofy little dynamics of like, in Treasure Team Tango, you have Omega, who basically, you know, he's this big killer machine, but with Cream of all characters, he basically feels bad about it. You know, he doesn't actually know how to be around her, and like, you know, so she's like pointed like, "You're a bad boy, Omega." He's like, "I'm sorry." And then you have like Knack, and he's you know, in Outverse League, he's gonna get basically murdered by Amy. You have the goofiness of like Bean, and basically the contrast of Jet, who's trying to be really serious, and just kind of like the chaos of that. So just, yeah, for the most part, I just think Flynn really nails comedy. Again, it's just kind of hard to go into. I'm not very good at breaking down comedy, but I would just say he's at his best doing character interactions where characters are very witty towards each other, and just kind of leaning into like the absurdity of like the over the top circumstances that these characters find themselves in. And so finally, we're going to get to Flynn's flaws in Preboot, or I guess more so, the flaws he so closely had until they got assassinated. So what I mean is that as Flynn goes on, he starts to basically finish off all the stories that previous writers had, and he starts doing his own story. And so the story he decides to tell is, I'm going to like fuck all the characters. Sally's going to get, you know, roboticized. Antoine, originally he was supposed to be killed. And then the one on the right we'll get to. But yeah, so basically like with all this stuff, Flynn really starts digging into the idea of like just like Eggman is back and he's badder than ever. And we're going to go just as hard as possible in this idea of like, Eggman has regained his sanity, because Eggman, surprisingly, ever since they beat him in 177, he hasn't actually been the main villain until issue 225 when he comes back. Because all the time in between, he's basically just kind of floundering around and kind of losing. And they only decide to beat him because they're like, well, we need to take out Eggman, and he's not really a threat anymore, so let's just take him out now. So like Eggman coming back is kind of like is supposed to be the culmination of like basically like years and years of the comics run. And so basically Flynn wanted to go big or go home. And so he goes with all these things. Now, one of the big things that Flynn during this time he's talked about is he had the idea of like Mina and Nicole, and kind of talking about like one of the things Flynn is very good at doing is he always thinks of like let's question this and like ask what about this? What about this? So one of the things he asks about Nicole and Mina is, okay, if Nicole is the city, then shouldn't some people be afraid of that? And so he has the story with the Iron Dominion where he shows what would that be like? What would it be like if Nicole turned on us and the city was bad? Well, that would probably create a lot of dissent and a lot of chaos, and it would probably create a lot of fear. And so that fear would probably create a lot of fear mongering. And so that comes in the form of Mina and all these things. And so in the story, Mina has this big concert where she talks about like how like Nicole is a monster. She's like scary. We need to basically get rid of her. She doesn't mean it that way. Her thing is basically she wants to basically just like express these feelings of fear, but that's the way it comes across, and that's the way her lyrics come across. And she starts to be like, well, why are people thinking this? And when people read the comic, they were like, Mina, what the fuck? Why are you saying these things? That's really bad. And so Flynn originally, his whole idea was like, no, Mina's just flat correct. You know, she's saying all the right things. Doesn't really matter how they come across. And because he got a lot of backlash, he ended up having to write in a story where Mina and Nicole kind of consolidate, and Mina actually apologizes. She actually sees the humanity in Nicole, and then Nicole and her are able to basically come together and come back into the city. And basically the story becomes about how the city and Nicole need to protect each other. But that was not something he originally wanted to write. Separately, you have Antoine. Antoine was originally supposed to die. He wanted to just kill Antoine. And eventually he wanted to bring him back, but he wanted to go all in on that. Which if you do that, then you've kind of set the tone completely. It's kind of really hard to have like these fun adventures or have the characters bounce back as fast as they do if the character is actually dead. But the fans base didn't want him to be dead, so now he's in a permacona. So now there's a bit of hope. And then the one on the left is obviously we have Mega Sally. Originally, what he wanted to do is he had a whole issue where it's Sonic and Sally going on a date, and in that story, basically like the whole point is that they can't go on a date because there's so much going on, but they want to have some time to themselves. And it's kind of how these kids just can't catch a break basically. And then right after that, originally the plan was that Sally would be roboticized. So instead of giving the fans an issue where Sally and Sonic are able to actually enjoy the fact that they're back together, which is something that the comic has been building up since the beginning, that Flynn finally paid off, his original intention was, okay, for drama, we're going to have it be that they just can't be together. And now she's going to get turned into a robot. And that was the original plan. But because of literally fate, because Sonic 4 was coming out, Sega told him, hey, you have to make a tie-in to Sonic 4. And so he made the Genesis arc. And through that, he now has it to where, no, it's not just that Sally comes in and loses. It's that she dies, Sonic saves her life, And now she's able to sacrifice her life to basically repay what Sonic did and save the entire world. And so now it's actually a story. It's a story about, you have a story about Sonic and Sally's love changing reality, being able to reform it and put it back together. And then Sally is able to take that and save the day. So during this time, as you can see, Flynn was basically like really like pumping up the darkness to critical mass. And now it hurts because you care about these characters. Where, you know, during like Bullers or Penders, you're just kind of like dumbfounded, you know, you're just kind of weirded out by it. But it's like, it's there. Now Flynn is actually like taking your love for these characters and he's really trying to twist the knife. You know, that's what he's really going for. And the only reason it's allowed to even work is that because of one of the things he sets up is that Bunny joins the villains. And by doing that, she's really putting a lot of people in danger and herself in danger. And if she joins, she has to have a bomb put in her. So she will have to like work there and stuff. There's a lot of like moral stuff you'd have to deal with. There's also the fact of like, how do you bring back Antoine? There's the fact that Sally's body was changed. And we know that if you don't have the original body for the roboticizer, you can't change back. So are they going to do something with that? You know, there's all these like dark things going on and questions that I don't know how Flynn was going to handle, considering most of the ways he was trying to handle these before, we know for a fact had to be shifted because of fan outcry. Basically, people telling him, no, Flynn, we don't want it that dark. But he kept going for it. And so the way this ended up panning out is that because Ken Penders sued for the comic ends, one of its last stories, is that Flynn was going to tell a story about Knuckles finally saving his people and finishing up that storyline. But because literally right after the first issue, Ken Penders won the lawsuit, he now has to write a story where basically all the echidnas get wiped out. And this to me is a sign of the best of Flynn's like what he's going for, and the worst, because the worst is that obviously we have all these dark things. And so basically it took someone coming in and turning off the story for this to like feel narratively cohesive, because now the story isn't a story of like, oh, the characters just kind of suffer forever. We beat Eggman and for some reason we don't kill him, you know, or like now the villains have to keep coming back because he wanted Snivelly to come back. He wanted Finitibus to come back. So more like we've put the characters through the most turmoil ever, and the comic has to go on forever because that's the point of this comic. It's not supposed to end, you know? So Flynn had basically gone to 11. He'd gone to the darkest place he could go, and he intended somehow to keep that going. And so because the comic gets canceled, the comic now becomes a tragedy. It becomes a story where actually Eggman wins. He resets reality. And the reason that actually works is because the comic has always been dark. It's always been really tragic. And now it becomes this really weird story where the comic is just this big tragedy. And you kind of just like, it makes all the emotional moments really hit for me, because now every time the characters have a victory, every time they have a moment of reprieve, you feel like it feels like it's leaning into what Flynn has always been leaning to, is like, how do you move forward when things are so bad? And eventually things get so bad that you have to reset reality. And so it's just fascinating. It's not how you should ever really write a story, but the way it works out, I would never change it, just because it's so interesting and it creates emotional moments that really resonate. So that's the good side of it. But the bad side is, you know, all the things we said before. So reality gets reset. So in Preboot, in conclusion for Preboot, the thing that made Flynn work so well in this comic is that, one, he had a real passion for it. Two, he had so much stuff to build off of that it was just easy to do in terms of like, not in terms of how he did it. I think that's a skill unto itself, what he did and what he chose to stack on. But just the idea of like, what do fans want? Well, fans want Sonic and Sally to become friends again, because they basically were at each other's throats. So you tell a story about how Sally becomes a better person. Locke died in the original timeline, so we're going to kill Locke in this timeline too. And so now we're going to tell a story of like, how do you heal from like the death of a family member? And, you know, so on and so on and so on and so on. And, you know, those are all you know, you have Shadow and all these different characters. So these really emotional charged stories set in a world that is already dark, and basically saying, yes, the world is dark, but how do you move on forward? So now with the reboot, though, Sega wanted all that shit gone. And so now we move on to the reboot timeline. So that's Preboot. Do you have any thoughts or questions about that?
Okay, I want to add one more thing to the Preboot element before we move on. That I agree with, like, I was pretty quiet during that because I pretty much agree with all of that for the most part. I'm not personally wild about Preboot because I'm not a big fan of stories constantly wanting to be about hope, but it's like so overly cynical and dour when it comes to most of the situations and character dynamics. Like, I do think it did try balancing out in most places, but I wasn't a big fan of that cynical view of it. However, I bring this up. I want to focus on the main compliment I wanted to give here, that I think it was kind of throughout most of your commentary, but I wanted to really focus on.
Yeah, go for it.
the amount of insanity that went into this, because I don't think that should really be understated because of how many because like when it comes to Archie, everything was here. We got a mad robot genius. We got a bunch of random animals with superpowers, which what you expect with Sonic. But then we also got Matt. We also have like several different magic users.
It's also a post-apocalypse.
Post-apocalypse. We end up having royalty. We end up having a bunch of different political systems working against one another. We had
There's references to sex. There's there's genocide.
There's fucking magic. There's goddamn magic. So it's kind of in the same sense of like stuff like One Piece, where it's just like you can't downplay the amount of how much that series works, just for the fact of how much Oda just tries to throw everything in there, and how it just and seeing how all these ideas work off one another.
Well, and how they don't like hold back either. Like it's not just like tepid, like, oh, like here's a kingdom that has cake in it. It's like, no, it's a whole kingdom of cake in One Piece's case, right? And then in Flynn's case, like he sees all these ideas and he goes, okay, we're not just gonna do like, oh, here's the evil Sonic. Now we're gonna like make him Scourge and give him like an identity crisis, and he's gonna go evil Scourge. He's gonna have the red eyes, and he's gonna, they're gonna blah blah blah. There's all these crazy things he does with it, and they're gonna tie the silver and all those things.
Right.
Yeah, continue.
Oh no. That was pretty much it. So I think we kind of did summarize, and I think this might be what your point is overall. So sorry if I spoil this, but Flynn's best strength is how much he can utilize what is already existing and trying to make those ideas work, build off of those ideas and make them work towards one another. However, the less he has to work with, the more he tends to struggle.
Yes, and the more he tends to lean into darkness, I would say.
Yes.
Pretty much without fail. I think because he grew up on the series and the series was so dark, I think he just, his like, I think this happens with a lot of fan fiction writers or just writers in general. I know anytime I came up with a story, my biggest thing was like, oh, and then what if there's this twist where like, oh, the character realizes that it was like their dad, or like, oh, what if the friend dies, and like that, that, and then like you go through that. And then, like, maybe a week later you go, that was stupid. That's too edgy. But like, Preboot was a world that was dark and edgy. So it was something to where he could, like, actually take those ideas. And one, they'd be tonally consistent. But then two, obviously you want to have a happy ending. So then he gets to basically not give, like, a total happy ending. He gets to keep the edge by having it be, like, how do you move on from these tragedies and, like, heal? Which, I mean, again, for me, that really resonates. So yeah, like, it's one of those things where it's like you said, he's able to build off it, but the less he has to work with and the more he's left to his own devices, he seems to struggle and just kind of goes for like the quickest, most like with the Sally thing, basically the idea that will get the most like reaction or that kind of thing. Whereas what he had before was he had specific things that people wanted, and or he had ideas that could grow on their own. So yeah, so that's kind of it for Preboot. So now we go into Reboot. And then for people who don't know, with Reboot, obviously they said get rid of all that Archie stuff. The only thing you really get to keep are like the freedom fighters and a little bit of the American lore. But for the most part, the world of IDW or Reboot is that it is basically just Sonic Unleashed. But with go ahead.
Like just to finish off your thought, the Reboot is basically just meant to be Sonic Unleashes universe, but we have the Freedom Fighters and Kingdom Acorn.
Yeah, and then Archie original characters.
Right, but my thing I wanted to stress was this is not Flynn basically said this was him speedrunning this. So this is not meant to be, because one of the things you hear a lot from Flynn fans is like Sega overly restricts them. He's mandated to hell. He's micromanaged like nobody's business, without remembering he's already commented several times that this was basically just a speed run to what he wanted Archie to be by the end anyway, where he did want to do more of the games. He did.
In particular, what you're talking about is that from the get-go, he always had in mind that he wanted to create the comic in a way to where eventually you could just pick up a Sonic comic and just kind of know what's going on. Because obviously the big thing with Archie is that it's impenetrable, basically. So what he has said is that Reboot was kind of speeding up that like 10 times, basically, to where now Sonic and the Freedom Fighters are in one ship and they just explore the world. And so anytime you pick up a book, they're in a new location and, blah, 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 blah. The big thing he has here, though, is that he didn't have the world of Archie. So all of Reboot will be establishing a new world, a new cast of characters, because the characters get their memories deleted by the end of it. And so you have to find new reasons to care, because this isn't technically the game world, The ways in which it is the game are like Sonic Adventure, like kind of happened, but like the Freedom Fighters were there, but also like there's all these other weird things, so you can't like take it at face value, you know. And so that's where Reboot comes in. So first off, I wanted to just go over quickly Flynn's strengths in Reboot. So this will be a lot shorter. So in Reboot, I think the comedy is still pretty darn great. I think Reboot has it's a closer example of like the wit his characters often exude. So for example, the one on the right I really enjoy, which is Amy meets up with Honey the cat, and I don't have the page, but like as soon as they see each other, they basically like quote her like tagline, and they're like doing a little cute pose or whatever. And again, like Flynn had to like write down like, oh, have them do these poses or whatever. Obviously the comedy comes from the art as well, but like, you know, that's a part of him as well. So anyway, you have the tell you what's happening. I'm relaunching it as the Rose Collection. You will model it and be my spokesperson, of course. Yes, and to help sales, don't you know a princess? I know too. And then, you know, Sonic comes in. So what brings a fashion to you in a fighting arena? And then, you know, they keep going. So just like that little thing of just like, I know too, you know, that's just like a cute little just a joke that you just go haha and you keep moving. Or you have the one on the left, the middle and the left, where you have the joke of like they're on this train, and so Flynn kind of concocts a joke for each cart. So like the one on the left is that Sonic is like smashing into random cars. I've got a good feeling about this one. Hold on, Chuck, I'm in the wrong car. My bad. You guys can go back to sleep or stand by or whatever it is you badniks do. I know the way out. And then you just go, oh, darn. You know, so it's just like a goofy little thing. And then you have Amy, where she smashes this car. She hits a missile and she goes, okay, we're just, okay, we're going to be much more delicate with the next car. Yes. And we don't need to tell anyone that we nearly blew us all up. Do we? No, of course not. So just like, I think Flynn, he keeps that little charm whenever he does focus on the comedy. We're going to get into a reason why the comedy doesn't show up as much as I'd like. But I think for the most part in Reboot, when he goes for the jokes, I think like I'm smiling or I'm laughing. Yeah. I don't know how you feel about that.
For the most part, I do think like the humor in Reboot does work. Like I said, like you said, it doesn't come up anywhere near as much as it really should. Correct me if I'm wrong, these are like 2 of the only 3 comedic issues throughout the entire main run. Am I right?
As far as like comedically driven stories, yes. But he does throw comedy a lot into like mostly with Sonic and like his banter with characters, obviously. Yeah. But yeah, no, these are the stories where he focuses on comedy. Which he didn't even really do much in Preboot, where he would just make a comedy focused arc. So he kind of starts doing that a little more, which I do appreciate because I think it's better than a lot of the other things he writes for Reboot. But yeah, I just want to give credit where it was due. I think for the most part, the characters, especially I think Amy and Sonic, I think we would both agree when they're not doing character stuff with Sonic in Reboot, which we'll get to. Sonic's pretty charming. He's pretty funny. He's got like a wit to him. And Amy's cute and kind of bubbly, you know?
Reboot Amy is like one of the few compliments I give him about his writing overall. So I do think he actually got Amy pretty well in Reboot.
Yeah, she has the romance per Sonic, but she also kind of has her like her like aggressive attitude that's really fun to play off of. And then she also gets to be more cutesy and girly, which is cool. And then she's just very hyperactive. So I really like her. And then she's constantly doing things. So I want to give credit to the comedy. And then the other thing I wanted to give credit to is that I think that conceptually a lot of the ways he combines things are really interesting. So for example, we talked about in Preboot, he's really good at like stacking character stuff. For the most part, he doesn't really have anything to work with there. So instead of what he does is he stacks on how do I combine American lore with the game lore? And so one of the ways he does this that's really cool is he takes Breezy, who in Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog was, I think, a robot. And basically he makes it to where like in this universe, that kind of storyline where like Scratch and Grounder, that takes place in the context of the Sonic the Hedgehog 2 Game Gear game. And then after that, Breezy is basically like this orphan kid who is only working for Robotnik because like she's an orphan. She wants food and money. And so then once that's over, we have this scene right here where she meets Metal Sonic. And basically Metal Sonic is like, hey, Breezy, you know, because before this, he's dressed up like Eggman. And he's like, hey, Breezy, you know, like I'm going to give you like your own little casino to work at and you can work for me. And then she like kind of calls out that it's Metal Sonic. And so now we have this idea of like the casino level from Sonic Heroes is not just like it exists here, but it was made for Breezy to like be a trap for Sonic during Sonic Heroes. And so it's kind of this cool thing where like it gives you just enough to where like when you fill in the blanks in your head of like, oh, a Sonic Heroes where like all the like the Unleashed characters and the Archie characters and the game and the Sad AM characters or the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog characters, they kind of like exist in tandem with it, and it's kind of like it gives you a peek into how that works. I think all that's really cool and clever. I think it's really fun. He doesn't do it. There's a way in which he does this that I think is not the best. But I think for the most part, when he is trying to do the world building, I am really impressed by like how he combines all these things and comes up with like a cool concept, at least like conceptually, you know. So I don't know how you feel about any of that.
I want to talk about that a little bit more at the end because, let's talk about that a little bit more at the end. So I'll hold my thoughts on it for now.
And then the final thing I wanted to give Flynn is that there are 3 characters in which I would say he actually gives like a genuine like heart to them. Because one of the big things I love about Preboot is the heart of the characters. In Reboot, he doesn't really focus on that a lot, which we'll get to. But the 3 characters he gives stuff to is Shadow. Shadow has his whole story of basically like dealing with the fact that he has to destroy his own people, and that with the black arms, and then kind of basically being like, no, I'm still going to fight against you because you guys are evil. It's nothing grand, like it's obviously a very simple thing for him to learn, but it's something to where like the way it's conveyed and the way he struggles with that, the way they'll like show little facial features when he's like destroying the black arms. It's one of those things where it's just kind of like a nice little like, oh, that's kind of cool that they address that. And his relationship with Team Dark is like generally cute in that issue. The other one would be Nicole. Nicole has like a little thing about like self-discovery. I'm not going to give credit to like her relationship with Sally, which I think is really lame, which we'll get to. But I would say the end result of that story where she decides she wants to fly on the plane instead of living in her handheld. Obviously, the idea of like a computer achieving sentience and wanting to have emotion, that's just inherently pretty engaging. So I really like that story for her. And Nicole's cute. And then the final thing, which I would give full praise all around, is I think Knuckles is just genuinely has a great story from start to finish in Reboot. For people who don't remember, Knuckles' whole story is that once again, he has to, like, the Master Emerald's going to be destroyed. And the reason it's going to be destroyed, or he has to destroy it, is basically because Shadow and Gun are basically like, hey, the world's all destroyed, and we have like an evil alien from the Black Arms who wants to take its power. So we're going to take the Master Emerald, and your island will continue floating because all the continents are floating, and then we will bring it back later. And Knuckles very stubbornly is like, no, it's my job to watch this. And he doesn't have like an argument against it in the sense of like, you're going to use it for evil or things like that. It is purely a selfish motive. Obviously, like, you could I think it's fair for him to argue like he would watch it better, but like his motive comes from a place of like, I don't have a purpose in life. My whole being is I watch this stupid rock. You are not just going to casually take it away like it's just something you can do. And so he fights Shadow and blah blah blah, and then he destroys it because he doesn't want Gun to take it, and so now he's gonna recollect it and regrow it. And so eventually that culminates in this story where he teams up with Amy. And we have this really great conversation that I'm just going to basically read, which is, it's been ages since I've been West Side Island. Have you been? It's gorgeous. And he goes, huh? And she goes, hey, cheer up. We caught a lucky break with all the swords, the stars being together. We'll have the Master Emerald in no time. It's not that. It's just, never mind. It's okay. It's just the two of us. You can tell me anything. What's to tell? I'm just the guardian of the Master Emerald who isn't cut out for his job. What? How many times has it been stolen now or shattered? Is Shadow right and it'd be better off in a vault somewhere? Forget Shadow. I'll tell you what I know. You're a good guy. Sure, you've been tricked and robbed, but you've been on your own for most of your life. You've been brave enough to live in the wild, doing a thankless job and fully committing to it no matter the odds. You're a special kind of person, a hero even. Then he pauses. Thanks, Amy. Anytime. And then they have a little banter. And then at the end, Amy basically says, what I admire about people like Sonic and you is he goes, he never gives up. And that's what I find most inspired about you two. No matter what, you keep on fighting. And then it goes, you keep on fighting, you keep on fighting. And Knuckles is having this flashback during a scene where he is frozen. Like he's basically, the Master Emerald's been stolen again. Amy's been stolen and he's frozen. He can't do anything. And so remembering Amy's words about how like she believes in him, even if like he has a useless job and he doesn't even know why he's doing it, that gives him basically shonen strength. And he rips out and he comes out and he saves the day. He saves Amy, saves the Master Emerald. And by the end of the story, basically Knuckles finds a actually creative way to hide the emerald, which is that he takes all the emeralds from this little base that give off magic energy, and he puts them all over his island so that as soon as someone gets on the island, they are going to be very confused because it's going to feel like the Master Emerald's just everywhere and he can track them down and get rid of them. So by the end, Knuckles comes up with a new way to make his job more helpful and more useful, and like he can better protect the emerald in a way. And then he comes to the conclusion of basically like, hey, even if I don't know why I'm doing this job or what it's for, I take pride in it, I take value in it, and there are people who believe in me, so maybe that's enough. And that's the story of Knuckles. So it's a story about basically Knuckles just like taking pride in what he's doing, even if no one else finds value in it. That's great. I don't know where the heck any of that is for all the other characters, but it's there for Knuckles. I don't know why it's here. But
two things. One is because Flynn has gone on record saying like Knuckles is his favorite character. But
true.
Two, he technically did try doing this with other characters. It's just it didn't really work.
Yeah, so let's get into it then, if we want.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so we'll jump to this then. So the big thing with Reboot is that all the characters kind of suck. And what I mean by they suck is that the Freedom Fighters in Preboot, obviously they had a pre-established universe, and a lot of their character traits were based around like being a soldier or being a politician or being a bruiser or being being the leader or whatever. And so those were all things that like the comic could then explore, because Preboot was a world that really leaned into those things. It leaned into the politics, it leaned into the war, it leaned into all those things. It leaned into the tragedy of these characters. But now the Freedom Fighters are an adventure team, allegedly. And so what their skill set is Sally is the leader. She tells people where to go. That's what she does. Bunny and Antoine, they fight things, but they have funny accents. Rotor, he makes the ship. And he has one little character trait, which we'll get into, but and he also fights. So, and then you have Tails. Tails is around. And then you have Amy. Amy has personality, but for the most part, all she's doing is fighting, which in turn, Flynn realized I don't have to do anything with her. So I'm going to put her in the Knuckles story where she can actually do something and her character can be useful. And then you have Sonic, and Sonic is just mostly, fighting bad guys.
No. To be fair, he does want to give Sonic a character arc.
We'll get to that, but just like in terms of for the most part. So you can kind of take it from here because I know you have a lot to say about this. But that's my kind of framing.
One of the things I liked about Reboot in comparison to IDW not IDW, in comparison to I guess IDW too, but in comparison to Preboot Archie was we're trying to streamline what the story was supposed to be about. We're not trying to have this be about like 40 different characters. We are at the bare minimum supposed to have a central cast. We are going to have Sonic, the Freedom Fighters, and the Freedom Fighters. It should be mainly focused on them. And the comic, at the very least, wants to try to be that.
Yes.
But like you said, not only do they barely have any personality traits beyond just doing what their role is for certain fights, which means that they have zero chemistry with each other for the most part. And the story basically doesn't go out of its way to have the characters explicitly state what their relationship is, just so you can pretend like there's a dynamic between these guys. But even on top of that, you're just kind of left with a really underwhelming, overcrowded cast because we're still dealing with a cast of about 10 or so. With Sonic and the Freedom Fighters, that's about 6, 7 how you want to count Nicole. Then you also have Big, Cream, Cheese if you really want to stretch it, and then out of fucking nowhere we need to also count Chip.
Well, Chip is the biggest one. I just want to knock him out, which is that Chip, obviously people love Sonic Unleashed for Chip and Sonic's relationship. In this comic, they don't have a relationship because Sonic's relationship with every character is he's a nice guy to everybody. Everybody likes Sonic. He's generally, I think Tails literally says the great thing about Sonic is he basically treats everyone the same. And you feel it because with Chip, who's supposed to be the core story, because by the end they just do the end of Sonic Unleashed, Chip sacrifices himself and you don't feel anything. So when they try to, and they realize so much that they didn't give him anything, that when Chip is like dying or whatever, he has like a little thing. He's like, all the memories I shared with my friends. And they have to put in new scenes that didn't exist because he doesn't do anything with anybody.
Wait, no. You're conflating two scenes. There's that scene that happens like right after he supposedly joins the group and it's like, oh yeah, even though I've been with you guys 2 months, I have all these wonderful memories. And it's just like him just doing the most basic shit with all the Freedom Fighters. And then we get to the finale when he's dying, he's just going, Tails, Tails and Rotor, I loved how much I was able to learn from you. Bunny and Antoine, I love how much you taught me what true love is. Sally, I will always. It's just that kind of like it has to basically the comic basically has to say, hey, these guys do have a relationship. Trust us, and not actually have to put a story in to actually describe it. Which I don't know if you're getting to this, but I want to say this right here.
Yeah, go for it.
Worst part about Reboot is that it prioritizes world building and trying to just hit the bare minimum of unleashed character beats just for the sake of world building at the expense of everything else.
World building page. Yeah, there are so many issues or just storylines where characters are just expositing and just being like, here's a place from Unleashed. Okay, check that off. Here's the new Freedom Fighters. Here's their kind of base personality. They fight a monster. Moving on. Or like you have this one on the left where it's like they have to establish Lupe and the Wolfpack. And you have the scene where it's basically like, oh, you have to fight. And then she's like, I won't get my dad back. She's dead. And then Sonic's doing his thing. And she's like, oh, but you have a community. You have a village. You have to fight. And then she fights. And it's like, there you go. And then she says after this, like, Sally was the one who gave me courage. Anyway, next issue.
Well, actually, hold up. Here's the thing. This applies to Lupe. This applies to what are this group Freedom Fighters supposed to be called?
The sand ones.
Well, the sand ones, but also the ones that you have on page.
Oh, yeah, these are like the Chunan ones.
The Chunan Freedom Fighters, as well as when it comes to the new egg bosses. Like we end up having whole issues, having whole universe arcs dedicated to that, dedicated to saying that these guys exist. And my question is,
but not like punctuating a story about them, just establishing they exist and that they have history. Moving on.
And I'm like, why did we need to do this? We don't.
Well, especially when we have these characters that we should be doing that first with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, this is where it really just kind of shows me that, like, Flynn, I 100% believe is a fan. He doesn't understand the genre that he's working in. You don't write adventure for the sake of world building or for the sake of just showing that places exist. You do that. The whole point of adventure is about exploring, developing characters, going into those different world building and locations. You don't just end. If you end up going to having issues that are just exploring that those locations exist, like, yeah, you could technically set that up, but now we've taken out any type of fun is going to be when we end up of actually getting a chance to go there, getting invested in the culture, getting invested with what's going on, and getting invested with what this location is. Because instead we just kind of hit it off like we're just like driving through this place on a road trip instead of actually like going here and getting invested with the location, which is the whole point of any adventure series worth it. Any adventure series worth a damn. Like I brought up One Piece, but you can go to episodic stuff too. Avatar, Doctor Who, hell. Even fucking Pokemon understood that you have to, when you end up going from one location to another, especially when you're trying to go on an adventure and really get the characters, and especially the audience engaged with this location, you need to make sure that the story is about exploring and getting invested with the scene, the city, getting invested with the people there, and how those locations contrast with the protagonists. Not just
our heroes.
Yeah, not just setting this shit up just so we can come back to this later.
Yeah, and for the most part, and real quick before we move on to that, I wanted to say that with these two scenes on screen, to give you an idea of how like useless the Freedom Fighters are, when they get to the Sonic Unleashed finale, they go in. The whole plan was that we got all the Chaos Emeralds, and then Eggman basically just goes, you know what, I want those back, and so he hires the Battlebird Armada, who in the comic are just like one of the forces that work for Eggman. Like they've had no setup really, other than that they exist, and they just destroy our heroes like it's nothing. Steal all of their emeralds. So basically, like, you know, it's supposed to be like the dark, you know, final whatever. So now our heroes have to like have one final push, right? And they even try to have like an emotional moment where it's like, oh, Nicole dies. That lasts for one panel and then she's back and it's fine. And then they're like, oh, what are we going to do? We have to save the world. But then what happens is that Sonic goes in and he fights all the Sonic Unleashed box and he just does the ending of Sonic Unleashed. Meanwhile, Sally and all the Freedom Fighters are just fighting robots. And by the end, Sally is like, hey, so I just like she literally says, she's like, I just realized, you know, basically like we didn't really get to accomplish anything. Sonic's kind of doing the saving the day for us. And then Rotor's just like, yeah, but like we took out some egg bosses. That's like helpful kind of. And she's like, I guess, you know, well, I guess we just root for Sonic. And then you have this image on the right, which is that the Freedom Fighters go into they get in this trap and they basically just get like destroyed. And so this is the first time in the comic outside of like a B story where they just go in a cave and they have to fight like two robots on the way out. This is the first story where they're like on their own and they're like, it's like all of them besides Sonic and they just get obliterated. So like we've kind of gone the opposite direction of like Sonic, instead of it being like it's about everyone, which means that Sonic is like also needs his friends or whatever. Now it's like the side cast are not only they don't have really much character going on. We'll get to what character they do have, but they don't have much character going on. But also they're basically just useless without Sonic.
Yes,
and the comic consistently proves this up to its finale. You know, and so it's very weird, and it kind of just makes the team feel even more disconnected because the whole thing Sonic talks about is like, oh, I should have been there, but now that we're back, we're stronger together. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's a single story after this where Sonic and Co team up and they accomplish something together.
At best, it's when they end up fighting one of the monsters from Sonic Unleashed, and I'm like, I don't think you should get credit for. I don't think they should be given credit for that. It's like they're fucking one-hit moves. I don't.
It's like a mini boss. Yeah, it's like the mini boss or whatever, and they also have Knuckles there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that's a big thing. But I guess now we can talk about what character they do decide to give. So we have, so there are moments. So first off, I want to give a big rant, which is that the actual backstories of these characters have changed from Preboot. They have completely new backstories. Now, you would think if you want to get me invested in these characters, you would put those near the start, after the characters get their, maybe make those the B stories, right? But no, these stories, these very important stories about like what the histories are of these characters and where they came from and all their things, they are relegated to like a bunch of different magazines and spin-offs, and like you have to like go out of your way to find these things. And they just feel so disconnected because all it is that they're just in a training simulation and they're just like, I remember that time when my backstory happened, and then they recall their backstory. So they feel very like automated too. It's hard to get invested in them. It's like, it's the equivalent of looking up the wiki page, basically.
Yes.
When you read
it. That's what they were there for. Like, yeah. I see people all the time begging for the freedom fighters to come, for Flynn to bring the freedom fighters back. And I'm like, even ignoring all of my problems with IDW, even ignoring my problems with Flynn right now, like, what do you think he's going to do with them when he brings, if he did get the ability to bring them in? Because we've seen what he would write them like in a more game-friendly scenario. Yep. They would exist, but they're going to be at best D-tier characters that are not going to not be able to function with anyone else outside of each other. And that's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, they're just going to be fodder and get their asses beat so they can get saved by Sonic. Like, why would you want to bring those characters? Like, I wouldn't mind seeing. I grew up with Sonic Underground, and I would not mind a story about Sonya and Mana coming back, but I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want them to come back at the expense if they were going to be written like this, because they would either just be fodder, just end up coming out worse. Like, I don't need them to come back if they're just going to be treated like this.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to bring up these examples because these are examples where the story does focus on the emotions of the characters. The left, we have Bunny's surprising she has a relationship with Tails. The middle one is we find out Rotor has issues with his dad. His dad's a villain. And the right one is more so focusing on Sally and how they attempt to establish like what was her relationship with Nicole. So from left to right, we could start, which is that you have the Bunny one, where basically like at the very tail end of like the reboot timeline, there's a B story where like Bunny and Tails are walking by, and like Tails is basically just like, yeah, no, I really love Bunny. Bunny's great. She's like my big sister. And then we have this flashback where Bunny, it's when she gets her robot parts, because in this timeline she was in an accident, and so they gave her the robot parts basically to heal her, because it's not that she got like roboticized or whatever, like in a an accident or whatever. So these were to help her, and then people are basically calling her a freak and stuff like that. And so Tails is basically like, well, people call me a freak because I have like two tails. And so then she has a little moment where she cries, and then it's like, oh, it's great that I have like Tails to look out for me. And you hear that and you're like, oh, that would be really cool if that was at like the start of Reboot and we like saw that dynamic ever.
Okay, here's the. I'm actually gonna play slight defense. This is still stupid. I'm gonna play slight defense. I would have been fine if with this coming up any point after it, this was meant to give some type of context into what the relationship was like. But these two did not talk the entire series up until this issue. And after that, they still didn't interact. So it's like, What was the point of putting this story in if it wasn't meant to give context? Because the whole point of backstories, is not just the whole point of backstories is about giving context to why characters act the way that they do. But Flynn seems to only get the bare minimum of you put backstories in to give audiences information to go fill out a wiki, not because we're trying to give more insight to how a character ends up acting in a particular way. What was even the point of this? And that's not even getting to the substance of this, because I despise this backstory more a lot. Mainly because I've already talked about this before, but the main thing is it defeats the point of what it's ultimately trying to go for. The whole thing about this is that we're supposed to leave off the idea of Tails sees Bunny as his big sister. We should be seeing a story about how she steps up to be the big sister. But if anything, the story is about how Tails ends up having to be the one to go support her. So even in a vacuum, even as a chapter on its own, it still doesn't do a good job of supporting what it's trying to go for.
Right. And then, of course, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this, which is Rotor finds out that his dad is a bad guy. And so at first you would think, oh, wow, like what's this going to say about Rotor? But I kid you not, I don't have it on screen. But what happens is that Rotor goes into a room or whatever, and like they're in prison, and Sonic's like, hey, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, but I knew my dad sucked, but I didn't know he was a monster. And then Sonic says like, well, you're twice the man he is. He sucks too. And you're great. And then, basically he's like, yeah, you're right. We got to do this. And then they leave, and it's never mentioned again. Obviously, I'm sure it would have gone somewhere, but that's what we're supposed to like. This is what's supposed to get us invested.
Yeah.
So rip into it.
Yeah. So first off, this goes into what I was talking about before, which is the whole thing of, hey, let's just introduce this character introduce this plot beat for the sake of world building. Are we going to do anything with it? No. Are we going to actually use that to contrast the characters properly in the story, or do anything to tell a story in of itself that built into the grander narrative that we're dealing with right now? No. Then why is this here? So we can just introduce that the character exists.
So we can do it next time.
Yeah. Which is, spoilers, the reason why Frontier sucks. But when it comes to, we'll get to that later, but when it comes to this, even in a vacuum, again, this is still shit, because it also shows how Flynn doesn't understand, because I've gone to this before. Flynn does not understand how rivals work. And the whole point of it, because Flynn ended up stating earlier when this issue dropped that he wanted to give the freedom fighters all their own individual rivals, so that they could have like someone that they could fight against, and they could all have their own quote unquote shadow, more or less. But the problem is he seems to just think rivals are create a character with an aesthetic that's similar to the protagonist and just roll with it, instead of going, hey, let's create a character that's meant to be some type of either thematic or that's meant to be some type of contrast directly to either their worldview or their motivation. Because that's what a rival is supposed to be. But when you end up looking at Tundra, all Tundra is the very much the might makes right. I have to support power no matter what. I was beaten, so I must. So the only way for me to maintain my strength is to beat up this guy. Which, spoilers, has nothing to do with Rotor's character in the slightest. Rotor's only. Is this where you want to bring it up, or is?
Yeah, no, yeah, go for it. I was going to bring it up, so go.
Yeah, Rotor's only personality trait throughout this entire story is going, hey guys, can we stop getting distracted with the B plot and focus on the A plot, please? That's it. He does not have any other. He does not have any other character beats. He does not have any other worldview. He does not have any other relationships. It is just him doing that over and over again, up until Sally just goes, hey, stop doing that, because I have a dead mom, so that means you have to stop doing that. And that
in that story, basically you would think like, oh, maybe this is something that long term he was going to do something with, but no, this gets resolved where they meet up with this girl who's supposed to have the key, and this girl also has like a dinner date or whatever, and the whole idea is that Sally is kind of basically showing Rotor that it doesn't really, we're going to save the world eventually, right? So like for now, let's stop and help people in their moment to moment. And Rotor's kind of being all grumpy because he's like, big picture. We don't really know why he wants it, because again, you think maybe that ties into his dad. I don't really see the connection.
No, spoilers. I'm just gonna end this right now. There is no connection.
Yeah, there is no connection. Yeah. And so when Rotor comes to the conclusion of, oh, you know what? The only thing that they try to tie is, like you said, Sally's basically like, I didn't remember my mom. This person's having a time with their mom. And then Rotor goes, you know what? I had a dead mom too. And basically like, it's like, oh, see, like there's a connection. And then he goes, yeah, you know what? You're right. We need to help. And again, it's that fast. It's really quick. And so then that's it. That's it for Rotor. So like when Rotor comes out of this, it doesn't come across as like, this is Rotor fulfilling a narrative or like a story beat, or like it feels really hard for him. It feels like it's like, oh, hey, remember this idea that he has? Here's the exposition for why he shouldn't do that anymore. Done. Moving on. So
yeah.
And then real quick, I can just sum up the Sally one on the right if you want.
Go for it.
All it is just in Preboot. What this is basically saying that stargazing happened. If you don't know stargazing, it's one of the most popular pre-Ian Flynn stories where Nicole gets her Lynx design. She kind of goes out and there's these really nice images of her like enjoying the stars, enjoying the lake. And she kind of like spends time with Sally, and by Nicole like kind of getting to enjoy this, but then obviously not being able to keep this form for long, Sally kind of realizes like she hasn't been stopping to appreciate the world and what she values. And it's just kind of this very somber, but sort of like, sort of bittersweet, like sweet in a way of like, Nicole is starting to realize, she wants to live and, and she gets to enjoy this moment. And so this story is kind of basically saying like, hey, she says, I wanted to see the stars, really see them the way you do. And then Sally grabs her hand, then let's go see some stars. Okay, let's go see. Oh, we don't see it. So the thing with this is just mostly like, again, Flynn and to be clear, so Flynn wrote the plot for these. Aaliyah Britt Baker wrote the dialogue. So if you want to toss this out wholesale, that's fine, but I'm going to use it as an example. Yeah. It is another example of just being rushed in these in establishing these characters' backstories, basically.
Yes.
And not really having that heart to it. The most they do for it that I like is that there's a moment where it's supposed to be once Sally loses her dad, and she's like, she's just like, all my friends are not doing well. Bunny, has lost so much. Antoine's lost so much. Sonic lost his Uncle Chuck, and I just want my dad. So it's like her trying to like be strong, but then also like kind of like try to be the leader and be like, oh, like, I care about my friends' needs, but also like I'm just a little girl who wants a friend. And then Nicole is there, and she's like, oh, at least I have Nicole, and that's a good moment, and that's it. Like they don't build off it. Like whenever Sally like protects Nicole, they don't like call back to these things or have like, one step up for the other and be like, now I'm going to protect you because you protected me and blah, 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 blah. It's just like, oh, like that's why they're friends, And I just think that's a big thing with what Flynn's doing is, again, before he had so many things to where he could just like casually pull from them and stack them on top of each other. And then he had clear directions of like, hey, we need to like have Knuckles heal from his trauma, but we also have Julie Sue, so we can tie into a relationship with that. And then Preboot wasn't really about like an adventure, so he could just focus on those things and make them really like sit with them and really give them impact. But here he's just like, okay, there's the backstory, moving on. And so these are, I think, unless I'm misremembering correctly, besides Sonic, this is all we do for any of the characters, right?
Technically, yes. We do end up getting an issue, an unreleased issue with Antoine later, but
yes, we'll talk about that.
Honestly, we'll talk about that. But
yeah, I mean, we can do it real quick, actually, which is just that I just want to say that I think it is really sucky that the last thing that was going to happen in Reboot before it got canceled is that he was finally going to give character directions for the Freedom Fighters.
But counter argument, I'm kind of glad they didn't, because honestly, because we ended up reading the Antoine, the first one that came out that was supposed to be focused on Antoine, and all it basically did was just throw in some edgy dude going, "Oh, I am a rival to your family," beats up
more lore.
Antoine, gets lore that Antoine has his perfect sword that's supposed to work with him.
Well, and by the way, I have it on screen. He gets this letter from his like dead parents, and we don't get any imagery with it. It's just the letter.
Yep.
Again, more exposition. There's no heart to it,
Yeah.
Sorry. Continue.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And then we get Antoine. He gets the damn sword, and then just basically goes up there, beats the guy, and day is saved. And it's like, the whole thing about Antoine is that he's not an awful fighter anymore, but he's never been the strongest fighter. And if you wanted to try to do some type of character work with him, this would have been the best place to do. Would have been the best place to do this, is to make him realize he's not a good, that he can't, that he needs to start stepping up and becoming a good fighter. But just giving him the "I'm now a good swordsman" sword kind of removes that conflict from him, which gets to one of the biggest problems I have with how he writes the Freedom Fighters overall, and really most of his character work. He will take a character, immediately resolve their only real conflict with really nothing to show for it, and then just put them in then just like write them into a corner. And
reminder, the most we get here is just a letter.
Yes.
That's the emotional, because the core of it's supposed to be like, my parents believed in me, right?
Yes.
But like, how am I supposed to feel for that when this is all I get?
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. But even so, like, even in a vacuum, this emotional conflict doesn't really have much going for it other than just, hey, you get to read a letter that's supposed to be heartfelt, and Antoine tears up about it, so feel bad about it, which, okay. Oh, feel sad about that, which I'm like, okay. But it's like, once we get to the end of this, Antoine's now like, oh, I am now a great swordsman with the great sword. And I was like, okay, now what?
Now he's going to find the swords.
So what's supposed to be his character conflict? What's supposed to be his arc at that point, or in particular, how is it supposed to tie him back into the story, back into the group? Because
and the thing that we know is that was kind of meant to kind of be the end of like the group. The whole idea was that these characters, the reason this universe arc existed is that Antoine's going to go look for the swords. Bunny's going to go look for like these like demons or whatever that she fights because she's like tied to the soul dimension. And then Sally, Sally, Cream, and Amy were going to set up their thing and go on their little adventure. And then Rotor was going to team up with Tails for something and like probably deal with his dad. And then Sonic, the whole idea with Sonic is Sonic was now going to just go on adventures because they saved the day. They fixed the world. Eggman is still doing Eggman things, Eggman shenanigans like he usually does. So Sonic is just going to be an adventure boy who he can just show up in everybody else's stories. So basically, Flynn deleted the core cast, even though he wasn't even really doing anything with them outside of just having them there.
Okay, and this is where a problem I do want to get to later, because this is a massive issue that stretches beyond Flynn, even to the fan base. I need people. I know I'm like in the minority where I'm like, hey, let's just have a core cast and just focus on them instead of let's make everyone their own fucking protagonist. Because if you make everyone the protagonist, like fuck who the title of the story, the title of the comic. If you make everyone the fucking protagonist, no one's gonna work properly. Because at that point, the story is not only be completely aimless about what the main conflict is supposed to be, what the main themes are, what the main protagonist, the main character is supposed to be. You kind of end up losing any idea. The story ends up losing its identity. It ends up feeding into the one thing that I keep hearing people complain about when it comes to making sure that the story ends up being as welcoming to new people as possible. Because how easy is it to jump into a story where you have 15 different characters with 15 different motivations where they barely interact with each other?
Yeah. The most they, and then when they see each other, they go, long time no see, they got all these other things. Well, and like, that's actually perfect because we can talk about one of so the big thing in Preboot was that the main conflict was that we were in a never ending war. So every character was basically attached by the fact of like dealing with Eggman being the devil, basically. Robo Robotnik, he's come here, he's fucked everyone over. He owns 99% of the planet canonically. And anytime we went to a place in Preboot, no character was basically living easy. Literally, I think like the only characters who have it like even slightly decently good is the Freedom Fighters, and that was only recently when they got a city. I'll remind you, when they finally like fight Eggman, and he comes after them. Their victory is not that they like destroy a bunch of Eggman stuff, is that they beat one robot and now they have a house that he can't instantly nuke. So like the whole point is that now we can finally fight back slightly, because that's just how much on the back foot they were in Preboot, because the writers basically gave up the idea that Knothole was a secret location. And so Flynn basically was like, okay, well, why doesn't Eggman just destroy them? And so he did it, and so that became the premise for that world. So then you have Reboot, and Reboot is just kind of like an adventure story. And Eggman is kind of like here, because when you look at it, anytime they go to a city or a town, they mostly talk about like Eggman's army that he has as like, oh, they're like on the outskirts in bases. Eggman doesn't really like hold land as far as I can ever recall. He usually just has like his own cities, or he has like little bases, or he has like outskirt things in jungles. But like we never actually see them like enslaving the Sonic Unleashed people.
Oh yeah, no, like that's the worst part about this is, well, you can safely assume that Eggman just wants to take over the entire world. He's never really shown doing anything other than just like random attacks. And we don't see like what kind of what are his explicit plans to try to hurt people? What is he trying to do to try to take over the entire world? It's just random attack. He just sends random robots to go attack people. Sometimes, actually, I don't even think that happened that much. I think that was like once or twice, but the rest of the time it was like them dealing with the Gaia monsters.
Yeah, and again, for the most part, when we go to these towns, I mean, I can't think of a not for the most part. Anytime we go to these like cities, it's just like, oh yeah, like Eggman's goons are also like around, but like people are just kind of living their life. Like they go to the sand one, and there's just people like they just go to a town. And they're just like, hey, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about the Gaia temple, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff. Like, it's seen as a weird thing when Eggman, like, blows up the temple. Like, he doesn't even blow up the temple. He just goes inside and he, like, blows up in the door, basically. So, like, or, like, New Mobotropolis is basically completely safe. It is seen as, like, an oddity whenever they invade New Mobotropolis and they, like, steal the emeralds from the king. And so, like, and, like, Station Square is doing fine. So, like, you have this very, like, Sonic game world where basically like Eggman is a threat, quote unquote, but more in like an action movie sense of like, we're not like the story isn't framing it as like he's this terror demon until it decides it does want to. And when it does, it feels really tonally weird, because the Robotnik or Eggman of Reboot is basically the same as Preboot in terms of tone. He's not the same backstory or whatever, but he basically we have the scene on the right where there was a guy working for him who did a bad job. And so now Eggman is saying that in all of you, because I've made you all like cyborgs if you work for me, all of you have these inside you, and I can freeze you at any moment, and I'm going to lock him in a cell for 50 years, fuck you. And I'm going to do that to anyone who disobeys me. Oh, crazy. And then you have on the middle, you have a bunch of people who basically their whole story is that they're like Sonic and Eggman are always in conflict, and there's damages after the fact. So basically like we should just work for Eggman anyway, because like it's never going to end. And then you have and we'll talk about all these because I know you have thoughts on these. And then you have the biggest extreme on the left, which is that you have this character, and she's like, my sister's basically sick. We don't know what to do about it. So, I just had no choice. We had to go to Eggman, and basically he tricked me. And now my sister, who's like a cancer patient, and we have to work for him forever. Because again, like I guess Eggman was the only option. And you look at it and you're like, this feels so weird from like the way the world operates otherwise. Because again, the world's just full of like kind people. It's filled with like really smart people. It's filled with all these things. And so like Flynn is trying to take what he did with the Dark Egg Legion in Preboot. But in Preboot was a world, again, in war. And so the only people who worked for Eggman were people who wanted power. They wanted their own land. They wanted to not be slaves, because otherwise the plan was Eggman comes to your place, he kills you, or you work for him. One of the biggest examples that the left one is stealing from, with the idea of like Clove, and that we had to work for Eggman, we had no choice, is that the Sandblasters or whatever, they were roboticized during the original Eggman's run. And then during, once he was defeated, they were just kind of around Sandblast City, and basically they were just terrorizing those people. So they tried to destroy the robots. But then when all the people got de-roboticized, they were just random people out in the middle of a desert. And the people who lived in Sandblast City, who had been fighting them for all these times, well, we've already established that they're basically just like desperate monsters who basically, they hate robots, they hate all these things. And so they basically go, you know what? You guys were robots, once a robot, always a robot. We can use you as basically slave labor. And so basically, eventually, they kicked them out into the desert, and Eggman showed up and said, hey, fun fact, I can kill you right now. You can starve to death, or you can work for me. And they say, work for you, please. Obviously, yes. And then you have other people who are like, just like people who were kicked out of their clans, because there's obviously a lot of like things with politics in Preboot, and like how people aren't fair to each other. And so you have people who want power. You have people who want to take over different races and stuff. And they all go work for Eggman, because Eggman says, hey, work for me. You get to be a cyborg robot. You get to own part of the planet. And all you have to do is just say that I'm the boss. There you go. And so, of course, power-hungry people or desperate people want to do that because they live in a war. But in Reboot, they just live in an adventure land. So it does, like, my brain can't connect this idea of like, there's these kids or these teenagers, or you have these other guys just like, I just couldn't go to anybody. There was nowhere to go. Sure, like we just like lived in a city or whatever, but I just had to go to Eggman, or we just had to give up, or, we just have like, where is Eggman getting all these people who want to work for him? Why?
Yeah, like I get what the logic for the middle is supposed to be. So the logic in the middle is supposed to be like they're tired of the war on both sides, so they're trying to work with one of the egg bosses in order to try to like make sure that they keep their city safe from quote unquote both sides being the worst kind of centrist. So but I get what the logic is supposed to be, but I'm like, one, why do we need this here? Like, other than just being able to stroke yourself off and go like, oh, we have this kind of like morally gray situation. How do we do this? Like, why is this here? Why do we need this faction to even exist? Is the point, or what's even the point of this? Because it's not like Sonic or Co. ever find out about this. And the few times that this does show up in like either Sat AM or Underground, it's usually just kind of pointed out as just being a stupid plan. They end up immediately going, yeah, that was a bad thing for me to do. And then we just drop it and pretend like it never happened because it was kind of pointless it was just kind of a way to have like a sneak attack from Eggman. But I don't know why we had to do it here, because the main characters never find out about this.
Well, I think the villain of the middle guys says like, when she's fighting the werehog, she's like, oh, like, you just this endless fighting. And he's like, or like, I just beat him up and we go home, So like Sonic's not really engaging with it, at all. He doesn't really seem to care. And then like Sally, I think she learns a little bit about Cassie and Clove. And I think they have like a little scene where they're like, oh yeah, we didn't really consider sometimes that like the other side.
Yeah. Well, okay. Here's the thing. Again, fuck that mindset. Like, even without going into too much about how much they don't really go into the details about what Eggman's going for, Eggman is clearly looking to hurt people. Eggman is clearly looking to try to destroy and take over as much world as fucking possible. You don't get to make excuse. I'm not saying that they need to be executed or anything, but they need to get taken down like any other. They need to get taken down like any other boss. We can deal with how to judge them and how their backstory factors in once we get to the
You've been like detained.
Yeah, no.
Well, and that's literally the answer in Preboot, which is that Bunny's uncle is working for Robotnik, because again, they were the people who were in the desert, and basically Eggman said, work for me or die or starve. And they said, yes, please. So they work for him. And then the whole story is like, Bunny's like, oh yeah, no, like I understand, I'll help you defend this base. Because all they're doing is they're just defending an oil rig. But the story rightly points out, what is Eggman using this for? This is probably for something really deadly. And so Sonic is like, we have to destroy it. Like, I'm sorry, there's nothing. And, there's nothing we can do about that. But the way they go about it and the way they have like they try to go for they get a happy ending or a bittersweet ending is that because again also the freedom fighters that we're working for suck, like they're a bunch of racist assholes, but like they're fighting to protect this thing. So again, it's supposed to be this idea of like all these people fighting, and so Sonic and Bunny, their plan is they're like, oh wait, instead of picking a side, let's just do our normal thing and just fight Eggman. And so then whenever they basically say like, hey, whenever Eggman calls, and because they just basically destroy the entire base. So they don't give it to the Sandblasters and they don't let Eggman have it. And they basically just say, hey, tell Eggman that Sonic did it and you'll get yelled at, but you'll basically be off the hook. That's how it always goes. And then so like that's how they do it. And there's like a scene where the uncle's like, it's like you fucking heartless, like you don't care, or you're putting my people in danger. And she's like, I'm sorry, uncle, you put your people in danger when you worked for Eggman. And she doesn't mean that in like a you're a terrible person way, but she means like it is what it is, like I have to stop you. And at the end of the story, the whole message of it is that they leave and they part ways or whatever. And Sonic puts a positive spin on it in the sense of like, hey, we stopped Eggman doing some stuff, which comes back actually later because it's a place he was going to use for the Death Egg. So they get rid of that. And so he can't refuel there, which causes him to lose a lot of fuel, which is relevant later. So they stop Eggman a little bit. And then they also they go, hey, we also helped out some people who are in a bad position, and we kicked a bunch of jerks' butts, basically. So it was a good day, Bunny. And so he basically points out all the there is all this conflict going on, there is all this nuance, but at the end of the day, we help people, we stop the bad guys, and we stopped Eggman. Let's take what we can. And so then they walk off in the sunset. So and again, that's what Preboot's always about. Preboot is about we're in a horrible situation. How do we deal with that? But Reboot tries to put that in the story, but like it doesn't put any of the effort into making me like sympathize, understand, or even tonally. I just don't think it should be here because it feels weirdly dark. Like it doesn't fit the world of Reboot.
And it's not even just that it's dark. It's also just kind of pointless. Like I ripped into the middle section, but I also have, if anything, a bigger problem with Cassie and Clove. Like, put to the side that I have no idea why Eggman decided to focus on these two for anything else. Like, was he like the test dummy? Like, was he planning on using like Cassie as like the test dummy, like the testing ground for like these cybernetic components he ends up putting in everyone
I think
else?
it's just supposed to be that he's sadistic and he just thinks it's funny.
Yeah, which I'm like, okay. Which if this was just meant to be like him just being a sadist, I'm like, fine, but okay, I feel like I'm putting too much thought into this, but my main issue is like, why do we need this? Like, what is the point of this being here? Like, there are easier ways to show how a character the villain is sadistic. Why do we need to have one of the main villains have this ooh baby backstory? Like, at the end of the day, villains are not here to exist in a vacuum on their own. They are here for the development and the benefit of the protagonist, and the protagonist taking them down. So
we'll get into that too with the biggest culprit. But yeah, I think we're almost done with IDW or Reboot if we want to move on.
So my point is like I don't get why she's here, but yeah, moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's that. So that is Reboot. So with Reboot, we basically I wanted to give one final thing about it, which is that I will say I want to give the benefit of the doubt and say that in an ideal world where Archie is still going, it is possible that Flynn, because Flynn's headspace, I understand his headspace, which is that what people really loved about Archie was that it had this big, massive world full of characters to care about. And so he thought the best way to do that was to basically speed run all that, basically. Get all the locations, all the backstories, and kind of do the heart later, and maybe throw in some heart if he can, but, and that seemed to be the idea. And then obviously what would happen is that, that was 2017. So this is 2024. If Archie was still going, hey, maybe we would have had these really maybe we would have delved into Cassie and Clove, and we would have dived into all these other characters and fleshed them out. And maybe we would have given all our main character stories because now they're getting their own universe arcs, right? So maybe we would have really fleshed them out and stuff. Now, if that were to happen, but it didn't happen. And so all we're left with Reboot is that regardless of even if that had happened, the section of Reboot would still be uninteresting, bland, funny sometimes. And also the biggest thing would be that the Freedom Fighters, when they were together, they didn't do anything. And then they got split apart. So regardless, he still wasted a ton of time. And he also wasted a group dynamic,
Yeah. And honestly, I wouldn't even want to give him that much credit. Like, I'm dealing with the same issue with Hazbin Hotel, where after watching it, and spoilers, it's a giant train wreck. But one of the things about it is that like there is so much about that series that they just kind of fumbled the ball, either in terms of not setting stuff up properly, character arcs either being done off screen or just being rushed to the end of it, or being rushed by the end. And I've gotten a lot of people going, well, maybe they'll fix that season 2, and I'm like, no.
Right.
That is not something you should be fixing in season 2. At best, it's going to be a retcon. At worst, it just shows that you had your priorities as cute. So
well, and also it just means that it wasn't fun like at the start, and I shouldn't have to sit through like the biggest insult you can give a show is like it gets good at like episode 30, like
Yeah, because that just tells me that it's shit until from 1 to 29. And when it comes to here, I'm like, that's not something you should be. So when it comes to Reboot and the idea of like, well, maybe they could have gotten good later. Well, yeah, maybe they could have written the greatest story of all time. The fact is that probably what's going to happen, because any competent story would have had all that stuff about making sure that the main cast had proper motivations, had good chemistry with each other, making sure that the story was about their focus and development, and making sure that the adventure and the drive for going from one location to another was doing all of that. That would have been at the start. That's where you could have told that this was a good story. The fact it wasn't doing all that stuff at the beginning says that the series already has very misaligned priorities, and there's nothing for me to say that
it would have got better
later. Like this is the reason why no one likes mystery boxes anymore, because everyone keeps going like, oh yeah, they'll resolve it later. But it's like, one, that just means that we're wasting time now until that mystery box is answered. And as we've seen countless times, the mystery box rarely ever pays off all that bullshit.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess to sum up Reboot, it would just be that it is now that Flynn basically kind of has carte blanche to basically make his own world, because in IDW he doesn't even have that. So in Reboot, he had basically carte blanche to make his own world, his own societies and all these things. And the best he could really come up with is just kind of like a bare minimum premise and idea. And then with his core cast, he really didn't treat them as a core cast. He kind of just saw them as just like, hey, it's the freedom fighters. They have their personalities, but not really. Antoine is French. Bunny has, but like even then he didn't really lean into those in comedic ways. He often would split up the cast, which like is not a good thing to do. And so, yeah, it just feels like Reboot just had it had Worldbuilders issue, like syndrome, where it's just like constantly throwing in new ideas and not giving you a reason to care outside of like, whoa, it's like that from the games or whatever. And then also just like having a bunch of characters who like he just never decided to make me care about, and I think that's the biggest issue with it. But yeah, so that's Reboot, and now we've finally reached IDW. So obviously Reboot was the end of Archie, it got canceled, and now we have IDW. IDW, from what we know, is it's definitively takes place in the game universe, or at least like it, like regardless of if you think it actually is canon, like in terms of like how it matches up, it acts like every Sonic game before it is canon. So effectively for IDW itself, the games are canon to it, even if you don't think it's canon to the games, regardless. So that's what it acts like. So this is supposed to be directly after Sonic Forces. And so, hey, once again, you might think that might be a good thing for Flynn, because think about it. Flynn is now coming onto a book that is a post-war story, right? So that might be something where he could like lean into big thing people didn't like about Forces is that it had like this really compelling idea of like, oh, what if Eggman took over the world? And then it kind of just made a joke of it, and it didn't really explore any of it. And it had like concepts of like, oh, Tails lost it, or, all these different things. Now, again, regardless of if you want that in a Sonic story is beside the point. The point is that those are things he could have tapped into that you could lean into for a character story. So first we're going to go into the positives. First of all, IDW is not very funny. I think like Flynn at this point has kind of exhausted his wit and his jokes. But the one time where it feels like Flynn just like woke up is the 30th anniversary Sonic special. I don't know what he was doing, but he just decided to throw in all of his absurdism, all of his like Sonic's like back and forth and the banter, all of his like wit, and he just kind of crammed it all into the 30th anniversary special, which is just a cute little goofy story set in the classic universe. Reading some of these lines, it's like the knock it off, Bean, but this is our big reunion after so long. Did you miss me? No. Oh, well, I'm not going to miss you either. And then you have this other one where you have Knuckles, darn it, I lost their trail and I can't see through this forest for the trees. And then Sonic goes, what's adorable is, I know he didn't say that on purpose. And then you have Tails and he's like, he's got like all these leaves on him or whatever. And then they come off and that's really cute. And then you have this little dynamic on the right where Sonic gets ran over. A little heads up next time, you should watch where you're going. You should remember who you're helping or who we're helping. You should remember we're helping you. And he goes, you should remember what happened the last time you got distracted while sassing me. And then he gets hit again. So like, just like, there's just like that snappiness that has just been completely missing from, frankly, most of IDW. I was just happy to see it here. So a big positive. I genuinely think if there's one thing you should read in IDW, it's the Sonic 30th anniversary special. It's just fun. So I wanted to give that right there because it feels like I don't know why it exists. I don't know why it's so fun. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
No, so far so good.
Yep. Next, I wanted to say that I think so early on, some of the ways in which, specifically with this one character, I think Flynn did exactly what he did in Preboot Archie, and I really appreciate it, which was the entire creation of Whisper as like her initial concept and idea. So the whole idea, right, is that in Sonic Forces, which the game takes place after, you have the OC character. And so when they have the weapon where you can use all the wisps. So Flynn basically took the OC idea and like this character with a gun and like made that into Whisper and gave her a whole backstory about her living through the war and like dealing with like shadow androids and like her own team. So like Flynn genuinely took the idea of like Sonic Forces, they're in this giant war, and he took the concept of from the game of like the Wispon and the OC, and he made a whole character about it and then had them basically learn to trust and accept people through their relationship with a very like more Sonic-y-esque character, which is Tangle, who has like her very like goofy persona, more upbeat personality. She wants to go on adventures. She's very kind, and she has like her big tail that can be used in combat. So that right there, I thought was a genuinely like inspired choice from Flynn, where he actually did all the stuff he did in Archie, which is take all these ideas, and instead of just being like, oh, here it is, he like made something out of it, and he like told a story. So I would say that the Tangle and Whisper story, while I don't think where it ends up going is all that strong, I think like the core idea of Whisper and what she accomplishes in that story is quite good. And it's a very good example of like Flynn doing what I think he tries to do most of what he did best at his best.
Yes.
I don't know what you think about that.
When it comes to the Tangle versus Whisper story in a vacuum, I'll talk about more about why I say this, but I've never been able to get over the fact that it just comes off like a diet version of the Mustang versus Envy stuff, and we'll get to that when we get to the last section about what.
Well, and by the way, that's what I mean when I say I think it fails as a story by the end. But I think Whisper herself, I think has like a beating heart to it that like I don't think most of IDW has in a lot of ways.
I think she did at the start, but the problem is with this issue in particular, it goes back to the same problem talking about with the Freedom Fighters. Flynn loves creating characters, giving them one conflict, resolving it, and then leaving them in a corner with literally nothing else to do. And Whisper is one of the best examples of that, where we keep seeing her. Like people have, like I've even been seeing fans complain about this over again, where it's like she keeps going through the same conflict over and over again, where she's just here to suffer. And I'm like, what do you expect? You like as cute as she is, and I think it was at least a decent idea to try to repurpose the Avatar character to be something else. You kind of wrote her into a corner where her main gimmick is that she can't talk with anybody. She can't talk with anybody else. She's a sniper who only really whose main antagonist is someone who only really made sense in this one issue.
In the one story. Yeah.
And we've introduced, and she only is capable of interacting with really one other character who really doesn't do, we're only capable of interacting with one other character, and that one character doesn't do much to help her grow and develop as a person. So I'm like, yeah, I get how you guys are frustrated about her suffering. But the problem is, what do y'all expect? They didn't give her anything else to work with.
Yeah, because her story is resolved immediately.
Yes.
And her story wasn't really that deep to where it could like carry like a personality or like give her like the value they could have done. And I will always say this is a very big missed opportunity, is I think it would have been really cool if Whisper slowly stopped having the Whisper speech bubbles and instead just had full speech bubbles. Because the idea is that Whisper started out as a character who wasn't shy. You know, it's not like she's always been shy. Like this is from trauma. So as she like opens up and finds more friends, maybe you could have it like she slowly has her mask on less, and then also like her speech bubbles become normal. That would be a narrative in its own, and you would have value to that. And so that would give any time Whisper shows up, you could track her progression of coming out of her shell. Of course, that's not what they do. And instead she goes back into her shell, back into her shell, back into her shell. But I think like there was potential to have her basically, if you didn't want to keep her as the same like quiet character, have the point be that she slowly comes back into what she once was. She could still be kind of like serious, but like maybe she is more like proactive and like instigating and having fun and speaking her mind and all these things. And I think that's just an example of like really big missed potential. So
well, here's the thing. You're kind of going like you're kind of thinking about the character like they designed that backstory first, that character in mind, but I'm pretty sure they gave her that backstory after the design. Because the problem is, if you have her start speaking like a normal speaking and communicating like a normal person, that defeats her namesake.
Right, which I think would have been really powerful, but clearly no one else does. Yeah.
Well, no, I think it could have. Honestly, I would have been fine with that because I'm like,
No. I mean, like they don't, like as the creative team, like they want to keep Whisper the same, you know?
Yeah.
Whisper is that she's damaged and she's sad.
Yes. And that's all that she can really be damaged and sad. So I'm like,
yeah. So that's that. So next I wanted to talk about, this is something that I think you would probably handle the best, which is so Flynn said when he came on to IDW, I asked him this. I said, like, you've had 2 comics that were basically deleted, like the whole world, whole character storylines. So what's kind of like your mindset going into IDW? And he said with IDW, he basically creates each story as it goes. Maybe he'll have some long-term plans, but he doesn't, like when he was on Preboot, when he was in issue 247, he said he had plans all the way up to issue 275, and that includes Universe. So like Universe up to 75 too. So like Flynn was planning like a whole thing, and in Reboot, he was also doing that. So obviously having been burned so many times, I would be very tired too. So his idea was that he was just going to create a fun story, with the first arc, move on. And one of the big things that you can tell he clearly wants to lean into is fight scenes. So with action in Preboot and Reboot, Preboot, the action was basically just set dressing to a conversation or a character thing going on. It looked cool because the artists usually did a very good job. But the action itself, there was never really a narrative to like the action itself of like the characters do this move and then this character counters it and you're supposed to like follow that and see how they're thinking. It was more so that the action was just punctuating whatever the emotions of the characters are, where most shonen stories will have a mix of both. They will have action that is like to be cool action and like to be followable, and then they will have the emotional core that punctuates it throughout. Whereas Preboot just kind of like combined the two, and it was just like we're just punctuating and then we're moving on because we want to do more character stuff. Reboot had action starts where like there would be issues that start with like we're fighting badniks, and then like they just blow up robots and then they move on. Unless I'm misremembering, most of the action in Reboot was basically just set dressing. Again, they didn't really focus on it too much. But I would say in Reboot's case, the problem with it was mainly that it was just wasting page space, because usually it was just there to like say a joke or something, And then now we've reached, I think, the culmination of that, though, which is IDW, which is that in IDW, Flynn does want to have action scenes, and I think they're really bad. So yes. You can go into it. You know all this by heart, so.
Yeah, no, the biggest problem with most of the fight scenes is that they don't mean shit. We are here to deal with a conflict that usually shows up. The characters have to do things to beat up the bad guy, and then we day save.
Or just smash a robot.
And the problem is, if you want your fight scene, if you have 2 ways to make your fight scenes interesting. Either you are really interested in the choreography and the strategy of it, or you are really doing a good job making sure it's both thematically fitting for the character, either
or like emotional.
Emotional is a better way to put it. Either it's a good way to show off who this character is in terms of the worldview, or it serves as a good contrast or challenge for who that character is or what they want to achieve.
Or like punctuates their emotions. So like they punch a guy when they've come to a character conclusion, or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And neither of those are here. We're not like pretty much all of the fights in the series are massive, just hot air, just like we're just seeing characters throwing each other around like they're fucking action figures. There's no sense of any type of strategy, any type of idea about like who can do what kind of damage. We're not looking to really do any type of power scaling or any type of system to it. I'm not saying you have to, but that is just not here in the slightest. And then when we get into the emotional stuff, that's also not here. There's no sense of any type of contrasting of worldviews, no sense of putting characters in situations where they have to like really get a chance to understand themselves or really show off who they are. It's just a lot of fighting because it's an action series and we just need to pump this stuff through. And
what would you say to people who might say like the Whisper and Mimic fight and the Sonic and Surge fight as examples of that?
So the Whisper and Mimic fight, I honestly don't think should really count because they don't really do much. She doesn't really do much to fight anything. She doesn't really do much to fight him other than just kind of like break down. Again, it's one of the reasons why I say it's a dive version of Mustang versus Envy. Really, Tangle's the one who ends up being the one to take him down. And it's
mostly that she just like wraps him up and that's it.
Yeah,
I think they have like one little exchange where like he hits her with the Wispon or whatever, but that's about it.
Yeah. Now with Surge, I would definitely say there's a little bit more of an emotional angle to it, but the counter argument is the emotion is just she's throwing a goddamn tantrum, and
it also makes Sonic look really bad.
Yes,
which we'll get into. But yeah, I just want to throw those out there since we're on this topic. If you had any like other details about that.
No, I don't. Like, I respect. I'm gonna be honest. I think you're giving IDW fans too much credit because I don't even think they could come up. I hate how much disrespect I have for these fans because I'm like because I want to be able to say everyone is just as if not smarter than me, but I've interacted with enough IDW fans where I just kind of have to accept they're not. So I'm like, I don't even think they would have given me that kind of example. So good. So thank you for trying to, but I respect you and respect you for trying to steel man it, and please continue to try to do that in the future.
No problem. So this one is me talking about. Let's see. Oh, so I talked about how I think Whisper is a really good example of Flynn like stacking ideas, which is again the thing I really liked in Archie. But in Reboot, Flynn has openly said, and he shows in his stories, he's really good. He's really fine with just like either doing the bare minimum or holding to the status quo or just kind of like throwing you treats. And so one of the examples, I'll let you talk about the middle one, but I want to give the left and right one. So the left one is an example of the whole reason this situation exists is that Sonic has lost his memories after the metal virus. And during this is the subplot during 2 issues, which is that Sonic has lost his memory and he thinks he's like Mr. Needlemouse and he's on Blaze's world. Holy crap, Blaze. Whoa. So like you're sitting here and you're going, what are they going to do to give Sonic his memories back? And you would think in any story, you would think, okay, well, Sonic getting his memories back, we would want it to mean something. So maybe it's that Sonic talks to Blaze and Blaze brings something out of him, or maybe it's a fake. Maybe Sonic actually isn't, hasn't lost his memories, and maybe because the whole point of the metal virus was the idea of like maybe he started this, so maybe he has a bit of guilt and he's kind of just trying to like keep to himself, and maybe he's pretending. Maybe we're going to actually explore a darker side of Sonic, and maybe a Sonic who has a little bit of self-hatred or something. And then Flynn's way of fixing this is that Blaze goes, wait a second, soul emeralds, and she goes, Sonic, magic, Hoya! And he remembers his past and then he leaves. Like that's it. That is something that I don't even think like a preschool show would do. Like it is so just like, look guys, it's a burning Blaze. Anyway, Sonic's back. And it's like, it is just so non-thinking that I could not believe Flynn wrote it. And then we have on the right side, which is that we have the arc of the bad guys. Now, the bad guys is supposed to be a villain arc, but unlike Archie, which had like a huge rogues gallery, we only have Zavok, Rough and Tumble, Mimic, and Starline. And we'll get to Starline later. But so all these characters come together, and I wasn't really down for this. But then, as Flynn went into it, he actually made me start like Zavok, because Zavok is supposed to be just a big monster man. He wants to kill. But then in this story, we actually see that he takes an interest in power. And even since he's in this situation where he thinks he's better than everyone, he actually finds value in giving advice to Starline. And also he finds value in how Starline is leading his crew, where like Rough and Tumble are making like their goofy little like, speeches or whatever, where they like put all the names together. And, Starline's like cringing, like, oh, whatever. And then Zavok, he says something really surprising, which he's like, no, you should be proud. Like, that means that you have like, unity. And he even like gives advice to Starline about like, you're not going to be like Eggman. He's never going to kiss you, And so like you have all these things and then Starline is giving them powers and all these things. So by the end of that story, I was like, oh, wait, this is kind of cool. What if by the end of the story, these characters, maybe they split off, but they like some of them team up, like maybe Starline takes Mimic under his wing, and then they can use his power for Starline's plan. And then maybe Zavok takes in Rough and Tumble because they're just like big, goons like the Zeddy. And maybe he's like, they're honorary Zeddy, like they're great because I'm great and I say they're great. So, so it's like a halfway, way of saying he likes them, and so maybe that could expand the world. But no, by the end of the story goes, actually, they're all assholes and they're all selfish. So they leave and they go off together. And if the story had like a Sonic universe or B stories where they could do something with that, maybe that could be okay. But since they're already such nothing characters who, like we pointed out, Mimic folds in on himself, Zavok is just me want to destroy, Rough and Tumble are gag villains, then that means that these characters are just going back to their positions of waiting to be rotated in and out. They haven't expanded, they haven't grown, they haven't changed. And so now we're just back to the status quo, and we've removed any nuance we could have given them. And it's really disappointing. And
it's even worse because that even applies to Starline, because the whole point of this arc seemed to be that that Starline needed to learn that if he wants to take down Eggman, if he wants to get Senpai's attention, he can't just be him. He needs to be able to like step on and actually be able to show like, no, I'm going to grow beyond Eggman. I'm going to become the true baddie. And then literally in his next appearance, he's back to doing the exact same shit that he was doing beforehand and still trying to be dyed Eggman. And when
well, you know what? Since we're talking about him, let's just do it now.
Yeah.
So Starline's whole character then is this idea, because this kind of leans into what we're talking about anyway, which is that Starline's whole character is entirely dependent on him. He does not add any value to Sonic in his character. He does not add any value to Eggman. The whole point of Starline is that he comes in and he's supposed to be the twist on like the Eggman lackey who hates Eggman, but he loves Eggman and he comes in. We don't know why. He just thinks he's a visionary. I guess he's a sociopath and or something. But he really loves Eggman and he looks up to him. And then he realizes that, oh, actually Eggman's like a loser and a klutz and I'm going to be better than him and I'm going to succeed him. And the whole story seems to be about how he can't do that and he sucks. But that is all of the first 150 issue or first 50 issues is whenever Starline appears, it is the story of him being like, I'm so cool, and then proving that he hasn't learned anything until eventually he's destroyed. And that's his entire character. And every character in the story is like, Starline, we hate you, we don't care about you, get off the screen. And Eggman is like, dude, I don't care about you, I forgot who you were, get out of here, loser. And then he dies. And that's Starline's character. Starline's character only exists for him, but he's like the only character getting anything besides Sonic, which we'll get to. And so it's so weird. And you can go into this.
No, you kind of covered it, but it's just like, I'm just like, what's even this is where, to tie this back around to Flynn, where it just seems like, I don't think he knows what he's ultimately what he wants to try to do with this story. It's like, because you're right. The whole reason that he wanted to do Starline was like, oh, hey, I want to try to do a subversion on like the Snively character, like what it means to be like the downside, the bad things about being like Eggman, being Eggman's lackey. I'm like, why? What's the point of this being here? Like you said, it doesn't do anything for Sonic's character. It does nothing for Eggman's character because it's not like he has to learn that he has to treat his subordinates better. As a story on its own, it's not that entertaining or compelling. Like, it's not that entertaining anyway. It's like, oh yeah, we're getting to see like the villain turn back up. It's we get to see like the lackey villain actually start making noise. I'm like, but he's not doing anything to get anyone's attention, so it's not entertaining in a vacuum. So I'm like, and as an audience member, what am I supposed to gain from this? That being a lackey for a maniacal supervillain is a bad thing? Yeah, no shit. Like, I don't think that was like a question to anybody.
Well, and then also, like, this is the world of, like, Game Sonic, so it doesn't say anything about, like, Eggman's regime, or, like, what, Eggman's, like, a monster, and this or that way, or what, so, like actually, this would be a perfect example of kind of, like, how far we've come, or we've fallen, I guess, which is that let's take Starline and put him in Preboot. He would make way more sense there, because Preboot is about everybody. Preboot is about whoever Flynn wants on screen. But what Preboot always did really well is that it has two things that it always focused on, which is one, all the characters are connected by war and like Eggman and like the horrible world they're living in. So they're always like tying back into other things. And two is the idea of like, you have this character who, or we had like B stories and we had all these other things. So like if, for example, the Enerjack arc, which is all about Knuckles. That is still actually tying into Eggman's storyline, because that is how Eggman loses his egg fleet, which is that after he's lost to Sonic, he is now getting really antsy because he's like, I just want to kill them right now. So he's like, I'm going to get a new power supply, which is that I am going to suck up Enerjack's power, and I'm going to use that, and then that's what I'm going to do to destroy New Mobotropolis. So Eggman is coming into this arc that is about Knuckles and saying, I'm going to take advantage of this, and that is his downfall, which is that he tries to basically play God and go up against this godlike character, and he actually overestimates his power, and that destroys his city. So it is like building off of Eggman's desperation from the previous arcs. And then when you go into the Scourge arc, Eggman shows up with Metal Sonic, and he sends Metal Sonic to fight because now he's just stuck in the Egg Dome, and he's like, okay, I really need to kill Sonic right now. Just make a Metal Sonic. And then also while this is going on, he's interacting with Knuckles' character. So now the Knuckles characters are getting development too. So like every character wasn't an island in Preboot. Sure, there were a bunch of characters with their own like worlds, but their worlds constantly like clash with other worlds and then fed into why things were different. Whenever the Babylon Rogues show up in the main comic or whatever, and they take over, New Mobotropolis, and they like blow it up, you have a whole history of them appearing in the Tales story, and then you actually learn how they're connected to Eggman. And then if you go even further back, we find out that they were established all the way at the beginning when you meet Jet the Hawk, and he's like, oh, I abandoned the Armada and I stole their gear or whatever. So like it's constantly stacking on each other, and that's what Starline would have hopefully done if he were in Preboot when Flynn was writing that way, is he would have been a character who, one, would have explored something about Eggman, and two, he would have tied into other people's narratives and then fed back into one of the main characters, like a Sally, a Knuckles, a Shadow, a Tails, a Sonic. But that doesn't happen in IDW because, as we can go into now, the Sonic characters, like the main ones, they're just kind of chilling. They don't really have anything. Sonic's relationship with everybody is he's generally likes them, and sometimes he teases Knuckles, and sometimes he is like, "Ooh, Amy," but he generally likes people. That's kind of it. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you hit it on the head. It's just I was like, I can bring this up right now. Like, it's honestly kind of funny how much we were kind of going back to the issue, the same problem that we were having in Archie, where it's like, hey, now we also have like 15 different characters, all with their 15 different characters supposed to be the focus, but they have no real discernible motivations. They don't really seem to gel off each other. They don't seem to gel off each other properly, and they don't really have any driving motivations. Like these issues,
Reboot.
Yeah, Preboot, and like you're using early issue images now, but this is the problem even to currently issue 65, where they're just kind of they're just not doing anything. And here's the thing. I know if you really want to be cynical, you could say, well, don't most adventure like you don't want Eggman like Sonic go around chasing Eggman like he's a cop or nothing. I was like, no, I want him to be an adventure protagonist. He should be going around traveling around for his own motivations, either because he wants to learn more about the place, or even simple, he just wants to go out and have fun in a bunch of different places and beats up bad guys along the way. Then we need to make the story focused around that. But instead, it's usually just like, first off, the story hasn't had Sonic be like an actual protagonist of an issue since, I'm gonna be nice and say Metal Virus. Like, I could count that last issue that came out of the main book where it was the Salamander one, but that was such a non-story. I don't even think that should count.
The closest you could say would be like Scrapnik, maybe, where he's like,
I'm counting main book.
Oh, main book, yeah.
Like, yeah, Scrapnik would count, but if we're going to focus mostly on Flynn's work, the last time he was like the proper protagonist of a story was the Metal Virus stuff. At best, he just ended up coming up as either just coming up later as weirdly as an antagonist in a lot of stories. Like it's a little weird during the Zeddy hunt, but especially during the whole I call them the disaster duo because they're not imposters even in the slightest. So the disaster twins, he's more the antagonist there than he is the actual leading character. But in all those stories, it's not about him going out trying to travel and going on adventures and stuff. It's usually him having to get drafted by the plot to go deal with someone else's conflict or bullshit. Yeah. Usually in the same location.
And then he's just kind of snarky and is there.
Yeah.
And then, so then the final thing before we get into all this is that, so IDW, the second arc in all of it is the Metal Virus arc, which I think to this date is like either Flynn's longest or like his second longest, because Mecha Sally might technically be the longest if you count like the universe arcs in it. So, but regardless, Metal Virus is like 24 issues or so of just like suffering.
Yes.
And because the whole idea is that this is basically a repurposed Preboot plot, not like a big one he had in mind, but just like something where he was like, oh, this could work. And you can immediately tell that it would have fit in Preboot because we would have had a whole world, we would have had the setting, we had the tone, but no, it's been slapped into the game world. And someone, I think it was Game Apologist, he brought this up. The Cream the Rabbit was introduced in IDW in a zombie apocalypse story. And the whole story is basically just about watching these characters be pushed to their absolute, I wouldn't even say limits, because it's not a character limit. It's just be pushed to just the closest we can get to torturing them without getting called out by Sega, basically. Where just like all these characters are just like, I mean, you literally have it on right here where Cream gets infected, and so she's like, oh, I'll just close my eyes, like it's a scary movie. And then the last thing is that she's just being held in Gemeral's arms as she like basically cries herself to sleep, as she basically dies, like effectively. That's kind of how it's framed. And so like you have and then you have obviously Whisper and like how much pain she's in because of like Tangle, and like just the artists are really obviously going for it. And so like Metal Virus is it immediately you jump in, and all it really serves to do is just torment the characters. And when they win, it is not like anyone learned anything or grew or like we got any ideas, except for one character. We'll tell you what he took away from it. But but all the characters just kind of suffer. And it really like especially now in IDW where it's very bright, it's very poppy. Sometimes they'll desaturate the colors and make it fit a little better, but for the most part, it's like a very colorful story. And I just think the contrast, I just think this is Flynn going back into his Preboot bag of just like, yeah, what's a fucked up thing that would happen, you know, in war or whatever, and let's put it in the story. But instead of exploring it, instead of like doing anything with it, instead of it being necessary at all to make it this dark and this like grotesque, it's just here because it's just like, let's do a zombie story. And if it's a zombie story, let's just have all the characters, you know, this is the only way we can effectively kill characters. So that's fun. Let's do that, you know? Yeah. And it does a lot for the story where you come out of it where you go, okay, where do you go from here? One, stakes wise. And then two, how do you like ever like how are these characters okay? And the point and the answer to that is that most of these characters just don't seem to care after the fact. Like they all seem to be pretty okay.
Yep.
And it's just really, really weird. And every time I read Metal Virus, like it just doesn't feel good. It just feels like I'm just watching these cute, cuddly characters get tormented, and for no cost or like theme or like tone or anything. It's just to do it because we wanted to do a zombie story. And by the end of it, I just come away going like, well, thank God that's over. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I just think it's a perfect example of like Flynn keeping from the get-go his like desire to do like really dark stories and like twist the knife, you know?
Yeah. So I want to have a bit of a chicken and an egg discussion real quick. So I've seen people complain about Flynn going like, oh, he still wants to try to work for Archie. He's still writing like it's on Archie. And I'm like, I don't think it's that he wants to write for Archie. I think this is just kind of his default writing style.
What he knows.
Yeah.
It's what he came into.
Yeah. So when it comes to him on this, when it comes to when it comes to this, when it comes to how he ends up, especially when it comes to how he writes on Frontiers, his whole mindset is just, hey, let's make everything as dour and as serious as possible. Hold up.
And so,
just to wrap up my point. The thing is, it's like I said, it's like Flynn only really seems to know how to just make things as dark and grim as possible. But it's never for any like direct purpose of trying to like either explore some particular themes or particular characters. It just kind of seemed like he learned at one point like making grim stories is what good storytelling is, and never seemed to get out of that. And that was fine for like Archie because it was already like this grim dark hellscape. But when you start getting further away from like the madness that was Archie, that becomes less and less applicable and just comes off like tragedy porn instead of trying to have anything to say. Because if you're going to be dark, if you're going to be dramatic, especially with something like Sonic, you kind of need to have something to say. Whether it's saying doing good things is good, it's something like that. Or
like what Preboot often went to, which is like, you know, you should rely and hold on to your friends because, you know, they're what, you know, make life worth living and stuff like that. Or, you know, like hold on to the good you can do now, you know. And it seems like he used to want to do that, but now it just seems like he's gotten to the point where, again, and reminder, he had this in late stage Archie or Preboot, but like he was just saved constantly, which is that he did want to have like, all right, let's twist the knife and that's going to be drama, baby. And then because of either fan backlash or editorial or literally just Sega, right place, right time, he was forced to create a narrative when in his head, he just kind of wanted the drama, you know? Or at least what he thought would make a good story, which was the drama, you know? Mm-hmm. And so like, this has kind of been a long time coming, but like with IDW, it just like really is crazy looking back on it that like ever since this, other than Surgeon Kit, and I would say more so Evan is the one responsible for really diving into that than Flynn. So that's more on her. But like Flynn, like ever since that, this comic has kind of just been in like we're just chilling limbo, you know? And like it still has dark stuff in it, like there's some crazy stuff Zavok does and all that, but like Metal Virus really like dug its heels in and was like, we're gonna start out like going for the moon. And I really don't think the comics recovered since tonally.
No, it hasn't, because like where do you go after planet-wide zombie apocalypse?
Yep. Well, and the best part is there was one story that was going on during the Metal Virus, and that is the Sonic morality. And so I wanted to, so the Sonic morality thing is something everyone's talked about, and we've talked about it to death, so I don't want to linger on it too long. But what I more so want to do is I want to track the history of its usage in Flynn content, because he has brought up the morality of Sonic killing Eggman, or just killing enemies in general, a few times. He's done it in Preboot, Reboot, and now IDW, where it's like a big thing. But I wanted to, I know a lot of people have talked about, like, oh, he's always kind of done this, and I wanted to track the ways in which has been done, and it'll be really quick. So in Preboot, the way in which, the context of which this comes up is that after Sonic has defeated Eggman in issue 200, this is like the first time they have like truly defeated Eggman since like issue 50 with the original Robotnik. So, you know, now we've had like 150 issues since then, with a bunch of spinoffs, and now they have finally defeated Robotnik. And when this happens, Sonic is like, he's full blown hero mode, like I'm taking down the bad guy or whatever. And like when he does this, they're doing this because Eggman has lost everything. He's like, you know, he's lost his city, he's lost all his power. He's basically he's huddled up in a base, and he's basically just like, I gotta kill Sonic, I gotta kill Sonic. And the reason is that way is because he was humiliated back in 177 when all of the freedom fighters proved that, like, no, like there are all these other people fighting you. And so Eggman was like, okay, I'm going to isolate Sonic and fight him. And then Flynn, for once, he actually gives Sonic a one-on-one victory. Sonic completely defeats Robotnik. Robotnik has him in this big dome area with this like spider robot that's really cool. And basically Sonic uses the exact same tactics that Eggman used on him in his fight when he defeated him, which is that he kind of messes with his mind, and he's basically taunting him and telling him like, yeah, you rule the planet, but how many days, you know, every day you have to fight for that planet. There's so many people fighting against you. Or like, oh yeah, you took over the world, but I was like 5 back then. If I had been like the age I was now, you never would have gotten anything. And Eggman is freaking out because like he's like, no, this can't, no, I can win, you know? And so when Sonic finally defeats him, as we see in the top left, he loses his mind. He completely loses it. And Sonic is like, well, I don't know. I didn't want to like break his brain and watch him like cry on the floor, because like I don't have it here, but like you can see it up there. Like he's got like snot. He like can't think properly. And he's basically just like a child at that point. He's just kind of like throwing a tantrum. He's crying. He's like in the fetal position at one point. And so like Sonic's like, well, this is weird. Like, I don't know what to do with this. And so like that becomes a tiny little C plot in the middle of all this other stuff happening of like, what do we do when like Eggman's been defeated? Who fills in the power? There's a little C plot where basically Sonic is like, why do I feel bad? Because like Eggman doesn't deserve any sympathy, and everyone agrees. Like you even have it here in the middle. He says, but this time is different. You know, I didn't just beat him. I broke him. And as stupid as it sounds, that makes me feel bad. So like the comic is saying like, that's dumb. You shouldn't feel sympathy for this guy. And then Tails is like, I really can't follow what you're saying. I don't think he deserves any sympathy. But then Tails is like, okay, but I care for my friend. So he goes, but that doesn't mean we have to be cruel in how we handle him. So I guess I can understand you feeling like you crossed a line. And Sonic's like, yeah, like maybe that's it. And he's like, okay, well, the civil thing to do is we'll put him in jail, right? So that he doesn't have to live with like Snively and like be in a straitjacket. Cool. We'll put him in jail and I'll feel better. And so then Sonic, we put him in jail, and we, you know, then we have this conversation with Monkey Kong where basically like Sonic's just kind of chilling there talking to Robotnik, because again, he's in like, you know, kid mode, and he's like, oh, where am I? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you're in like custody or whatever. Go to sleep. He's like, okay. So then like Monkey Kong is like, what is wrong with you? How is it possible? Like, and he says it. He's like, how can you show him mercy? He wiped out my village. So like he genocided my people. He's tried to destroy everything you've loved like multiple times. And he goes, and he's a monster unlike anything this world ever known. And you merely lock him away. You show him sympathy, understanding. How can you do that? And Sonic goes, I don't know. I guess I moved too fast to have time to be all vengeful and stuff. I just do what's right at the time. And then Monkey Kong says, you're either a Zen master or a fool, but you're impressive either way. And he goes, thanks, I think. So the whole point is just that Sonic, the vibes were just wrong. I didn't want to win this way. And now I have to deal with this idea of like, I kind of broke a guy. And I shouldn't feel bad, but I do feel bad. So I get it, just is what it is. I don't know. That's just how I feel, Monkey Kong. And Monkey Kong, this is to show what Sonic's character is that Sonic is just someone who goes with how he feels in the moment. And it ties into all his other stuff. It ties into how he treats Tails, how he treats all these other things. So all it is in this comic is that it's just Sonic. Why do you specifically not hold any hatred towards Eggman right now? And he's like, it just doesn't feel right. That's it. He doesn't deserve it, but the vibe's just not right, bro. And he's not like definitive about this. He's not like, this is my moral stance. He's just like, this is just how I feel. I don't know. And then Monkey Kong, like, I like that his two options are, you're a Zen master, so you're someone who's like completely like transcended reality, or you're an idiot, but you're impressive either way. So basically, Monkey Kong's just saying you're weird. like that's the point. Is he's like, Sonic, I don't get it, but good for you, bro. And also so that's how Preboot establishes this is that this is just a tangent. This is just a little thing we're going to do to just, once again, we're going to explore these characters and how they feel in this really dark and crazy world. And that's it. And that's all we do for that there. And then what this punctuates in is that Eggman loses his mind and then he comes back stronger. And then we contrast that by when he breaks Sonic during his return, and Sonic comes back stronger. So the whole point is basically just that this is the first time we've defeated Eggman properly in this story. And so we're trying to deal with the fallout of that. He comes back. So this is the first time this has happened. He's come back from we literally thought he was like a mentally deranged like child at this point, and he was. And so he came back stronger than ever, and he hurt us, and he did all these things. That hurt Sonic, that broke Sonic, but Sonic had his friends to bring him up. And now we get to the right image where Sonic is like, I will never give up. I'm going to defeat you. So the whole point is that it's a back and forth. It's that this is the final time this is happening. And ideally, right, this is where we're going to get to Flynn's problem in Preboot. Ideally, right, this should be the end of the series, which is that Sonic comes back after so this is the first time this has happened, right? And Sonic even said, like, when Eggman came back, he's like, I never shown you any mercy. Because the whole point is, yes, Eggman is too evil. We cannot just, like, let him be in jail or, like, leave him to his own devices. He will come back. And now we're going to finally defeat him, whatever that looks like, right? In an ideal scenario, I think you would have him like self-destruct, right? So you don't have Sonic like, punch a hole through his heart or whatever, right? You don't got to make it graphic, but you would finish Eggman. In an ideal world, that's what would have happened. But here's the thing: this comic was meant to go on forever. So here's the negative part, right? This is why Preboot is so weird, because Preboot ends. This is like a really cool story about like this back and forth, and then it actually does have an ending, which is that Eggman wins, which is tonally consistent. And it's fucked up and it's weird and it's cool. But if the comic had kept going, what do you do with Eggman? You can't keep him alive. You have proven in the narrative that this is not okay to do. He will come back and he will ruin everyone's life. And all the characters agree. Like, every character in the story is saying, I don't feel sympathy for him. I don't believe he should live. Like, he's the one guy, right? Like, he's the Joker. And so you can see that Flynn would have had to reach the problem that we're going to get to in IDW, which is that he would have had to keep perpetuating this somehow. And in Preboot, it's just this tiny little thing, and then it punctuates Sonic's growth of like he'll come back from anything, and then it doesn't get to follow through. But we know that follow through just would have had to be bad because it would have had to keep going forever, right? And so now we get to Reboot. Reboot is it's a very small thing. It's basically just that the one thing they try to do with Sonic's character is that when he has the werehog form, it distorts how he sees things. And the idea they go for is that these are fears and ideas that Sonic has internally. So he fears he's not good enough. He fears he needs to take out the villains or whatever. But then we kind of drop that, and we kind of just have it be that he's just afraid that he turns into a monster. And then he's just like, and they're just like, it's, don't fight it. You cannot fight yourself. It's not a beast. It's you. You are a hero. Then it will be a hero as well. So we don't really like confront what those feelings Sonic has. It's just like, hey, it's a monster version of you that distorts things, but like, it's just you, bro. So like, accept it. And he's like, okay.
Yeah, no, this is,
that's it. So you can go into this. You have more thoughts on this.
Yeah. I am not wild about most of Reboot, but this is one of the problems where one of the parts where I just have to say, fuck everything involved with this storyline. Like, I've seen so many people try to say like, no, this part's the greatest part because like we get to do stuff like they don't just make the werehog just like this immediate just a power up. They actually try to do like character work with it. I'm like, what character work? And
what character work?
What character work? They go, I don't know, because there is no character work. They're like 5 different things that you could kind of argue that Flynn was trying to go for with this, between either Sonic being but the big and I can try to summarize all of them, but the main thing is there's never like a clear establishment about what the werehog is supposed to be in the first place. They just kind of introduce that Sonic ends up getting infected by like really concentrated dark eye energy. Give him I'm about to Hulk moments over and over again until it pays off here. Mighty ends up going, hey, you shouldn't try to kill the bad guy, even though she's a fucking terrorist who just almost tried killing us and is clearly looking to try to help Eggman to destroy everything. You shouldn't and we're in the middle of a fucking war. You shouldn't try killing her in anger, because killing in anger is wrong. And I'm like, no, you get to be it. And I know they try to do this whole thing where it's like Mighty's like where Sonic's like the bad thing, is seeing like a misinterpretation of what Mighty is saying. But I'm like, I don't really care. That either way, Mighty deserves an ass beating for how stupid this is. Because
Well, he says in the top right, he goes, Sonic, listen to me. This isn't you. You don't do this. Yes, she tried to kill us all. That's unforgivable. But you saved us. You stopped her. And I think like what you're saying is like, okay, but like she's getting away. You could like stop her yourself, Mighty. But like,
or
like,
even better, just let him go. Just let him do what he needs to do. Like there's really no, because again, this is one of the things about like why Sonic really shouldn't be trying to do dark stuff, because if you're not willing to pull that trigger and kill somebody, especially an objective bad guy, you don't need to be going here.
So you're saying like since they brought it up,
yeah, you went here, you got to follow it up. Because this is the problem I have with both with Flynn's work here, especially in Reboot and IDW, is that he wants to try to go that edge, he wants to try to go that darkness, but he still wants to rely on Saturday morning cartoon morality. And I'm like, you're not dealing with Dr. Doofenshmirtz, you're not dealing with Draken, you're not dealing with Team Rocket. You are trying to have outright terrorists and fucking genocidal monsters. There is no reason not to kill them. Other than you are in a Saturday, other than this is a cartoon series, which is a completely fine reason, but don't bring it up.
Yeah, like don't bring it up, or just like don't have like such a definitive like this is the correct answer for the character, because then it just comes across as like but you're wrong, Mighty. Yeah. Because again, that's why like I always liked it in Preboot, because it was just Sonic being like, I don't know, man. I know I'm stupid for like having any sympathy for this guy, but the vibes are just off, and so they're like, all right, Sonic, because they're like, Sonic, because you don't feel like it, we'll just put him in jail. Like, it's fine, dude. He's like, okay.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like, it's fine that Sonic felt that way, because, like, in the grand scheme of the story, that's just his perspective. And it's fine for a character to just go, I don't want to kill someone who's trying to kill me. That's totally fine. I don't think you have to be the way. But when you are not only making the characters basically cops at this, basically cops, or the very least some type of militarized force to a certain extent, and basically being the end, and basically having to be judge, basically assigning them to be judge and jury, because there's no other type of infrastructure in this universe, unlike Preboot. This is stupid, and you are ultimately making them the arguments, the arbiters of justice. Basically, there is no reason not to kill them, especially when you've established that there's either no jail or they can't be held in a jail.
Yeah, well, and then here's what I'll say too is, so I'm gonna backhanded defend Reboot so that I can then punctuate how bad IDW is, right? Because we're having this conversation with Preboot and Reboot, where they're having this. In Preboot, it's just kind of a casual thing that's a part of just all the fucked up stuff that's already happening in Preboot's world, and they don't have any definitive stance on it, and it's used to punctuate Eggman coming back and then Sonic coming back for their final confrontation, which, obviously Flynn didn't get to fuck up. So we have that. Reboot, I will defend by saying, this is just this scene. This is never brought up again. This is never relevant again. It's just a weird scene, right?
Yes.
And I would say, ideally, I think what they're going for is Sonic would feel bad if he killed someone, which is fair. I think if Sonic killed that little, whatever girl or whatever, I think he would wake up and feel really, really bad about it, obviously. So I think that is what Mighty is going for, which is that Mighty is saying, hey, like, I'm going to deal with you right now because you're going on like a rampage. Don't kill her. Let's not do it. But he doesn't really bring up that. Well, he does say that this isn't you. You wouldn't like that. So I think that's what they're mostly going for. It just kind of gets like tied into this like weird, like, well, that was a weird tangent. And also, what does this have to do with like Sonic? And like they talk about like this is how he kind of like truly feels, but like it's like corrupted. And then Sonic's just like, oh, I'm like big and monstrous, and then he fixes it. So to me, it feels like it's just weird, and it just like comes out of nowhere, and then it goes nowhere, and it's like, well, that was Sonic's character arc. But now we reach IDW. Real quick, if there's anything else here. Yes. Okay. So that's it. So we reach IDW. So in IDW, they establish this idea of Mr. Tinker, and this is explicit. So in Preboot, it's a casual conversation. In Reboot, it's like a tangent in like a big fight of just like, calm down, Hulk. And then in IDW, like, think about this, guys, for a second. IDW, the game-centered world, Sonic the Hedgehog's core character trait, when he's not being, oh, I'm Sonic and I have friends and I'm a cool guy, when he's not doing that, Sonic's whole character that Flynn consistently focused on and Evan consistently focused on is, should he kill Eggman? Why is that a thing? But the big thing is that when this is introduced is that they have a similar thing to Eggman getting amnesia or being like a baby child in Preboot, where Eggman has amnesia as Mr. Tinker. And in that storyline, Shadow is like, okay, well, he is Eggman, so like, let's kill him. And in that story, Sonic is like, well, no, he's not Eggman. He's his own person, which, to be fair, he is his own person now. He doesn't know he's Eggman. He's this one guy. But the way it goes about it is that Sonic basically just like gaslights Shadow into like being like, well, like you were bad once, so should we kill you? And then and that's like, it's like, okay, that's a bit yikes, Sonic, but like whatever. It's just this one scene, you know, it's for this Mr. Tinker thing. He's gonna be Eggman again, so like it's fine. We'll move on and we'll never mention it again. But then it just keeps happening over and over. And the big scene that happens that kind of like I think made everyone go, wait a second, is there's a scene where they defeat Metal Sonic, and Sonic's like, hey Sonic, or Metal Sonic, you can be like a cool guy now. Just be good. And Metal Sonic goes, no, fuck you, I'm gonna leave. And so they go, are you okay? Yeah. Shouldn't we go after him? Nah, we gave him the choice to live how he wants to. We've got to honor his decision. Huh? So what Sonic has just shown is that he's like, I'm okay with Metal Sonic going off and doing whatever he wants because we said we have to respect his decision. Now, he's going to prove later that he does not believe this, obviously, when he's like, you should have just been a good guy. But let's say you want to be benefit of the doubt and be like, okay, but like you're thinking way too deep about it. Like, sure, like Metal Sonic tried to take over the world, but it's like an action adventure take over the world. It's not that serious. We're not dealing with like actual like you know, like pain and violence. And that's when we get to the Metal Virus arc. In the Metal Virus, there is consistently brought up by multiple characters that Sonic should have done something to Mr. Tinker, at least put him in jail, right? Because they just decided to leave him with no supervision. And so they're like, Sonic, you know, it's your fault. And Sonic's argument is consistently like, well, we didn't know he would turn good, and or we didn't know he would turn evil, and what? We just have to assume the worst. So he creates like an ultimatum. And again, this is Sonic giving his like direct opinion. Like these are things he believes. So he's like, what? We give no one a second chance. We give nobody you know, a chance or whatever. And then so there's a scene where he's talking to Eggman. And basically, he breaks the watch that they're supposed to use to like save the world. And Sonic has this moment where he's like, you know, maybe they're right. Like maybe I should have stopped Eggman or whatever. You know, he's made me pay for it every day. So you think, right now, the comic is addressing it. The comic is making Sonic realize, like, and we'll get to the idea of like why you should have this in the first place. But the comic is making Sonic address this of being like, maybe this is partially my fault. Maybe I should take more steps to stop villains. And so he has this conversation with Tangle where he's like, hey, you know, I messed up. You know, if I had listened to Shadow, or, you know, if I hadn't let Metal Sonic go, he mentions that too. And Tangle basically tells him like, nah, man, like you're doing your best and blah, 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 blah. And so then what happens is that he goes to everyone and he says this line. She goes, she got infected. She's staying behind to cover all of us. She said she was sorry, but heroes have nothing to be sorry about, which is also in referring to what he did, because I think Tangle tells him not to be sorry about what he did. So also like, screw you, Sonic. But then too, we then watch as Whisper breaks down, and like we have in the bottom right, you can see it where she's like holding her head and all these things, and like they're like, Sonic, do something. He's like, I can't touch her, you know, like I can't, you know, I'm infected. And so the story ends with Tangle, the person who gave him those words, telling him like, oh, like, you know, believe in yourself, and Sonic watching on as he's like, he made this grand speech of like, oh, I don't have to be sorry, and then he sees the consequences of those actions and watches this town be burned as like he sees Tangle. So you would think, right, the point of that scene is that we are contrasting what Sonic learned. Sonic thought, you know what, I'm off the hook. And then he realizes literally right after, this is what happens from what I did. And you have the silent panel. So surely this is going somewhere. And it is completely dropped for the rest of the Metal Virus. And it is only brought up once in the idea of him being like, Metal Sonic, you should have just been good. And then Eggman says like, oh, hey, like your infection might have spread on grass. Screw you. And then Sonic goes like, oh, you're just trying to get in my head, Eggman. And that's it. So like Sonic has this moment where it seems like the story is challenging him, where he's seeing the fruits of what happened right after he just got encouragement. And the comic just says, nope. And so this leads to all of these scenes where Eggman comes back and Sonic goes, until next time, Doc, and the next time after that, and the one after that. Maybe you'll eventually come around. And then you have the one on the right, where after the Zeti have canonically killed people, Flynn established this, and you see it, like they drop like trees on people. He tells Zomom to consume everything. There's like a doctor, he like slams into the ground. They drop trees on people. There's like a scene where like a robot's about to attack someone. Like people died from the Zeti. And the Zavok tells Sonic, he's basically like, Sonic, I will come back and cause more pain and destruction if you don't put me away or kill me or just put me in jail, right? If you send me back and like let me go. And Sonic goes, I'm not going to sacrifice my principles out of fear. You want to cause more trouble? Fine. Waste your time. I'll kick your butt every time. And from this point on, I was just like, Sonic is a monster.
Yes.
Because what he just told you, and again, this is the comic. We went from casually kind of like slipping this in as just like a neat little detail to explore with Sonic and how he feels, to a weird tangent and Reboot, to now this is Sonic's character. Sonic's character is, I don't kill genocidal monsters who are telling me that I will kill more people if you let me go. And my response is, you know, I'll traumatize 1,000 Cream the Rabbits before I let this company die. You know, like that kind of thing, where it's just like he is openly saying, I don't care what you do. As long as I win in the end, it's fine. And the comic has shown that it's not, this isn't Kim Possible. This isn't like, you know, whatever. People are suffering. People are crying. People are little girls are believing they're going to die, you know, and Sonic is saying that's okay as long as I win in the end and fix everything. You can go.
So to bring this to Flynn in particular, I've always found it a bit fascinating. I don't know if he was either trying to be condescending a little bit, and I just did not give a shit, didn't give enough of a shit to process it or not. But when I was trying to at the very least confront him on this, especially with issue 25, I believe, where Sonic ends up being first called out by SBO and then ends up being reaffirmed by Tangle. He ends up kind of going like, no, that's a way to show that there are multiple ideas and we're not really trying to settle on anything. But I'm like, when you end up having a character come back around, give the complete counter argument, and basically alleviate that character of all those sins and problems, especially when they're the victim of it, you are giving an answer to that. And especially when you have all these issues after the fact, where it's still Sonic doubling down over and over again that, yes, it's okay that I let genocidal monsters go free. Or in Surge's case, I condescend to everybody like they're genocidal monsters, because I can convince other people who have beat up, who I've been fighting with
are now my friends.
So yeah, that means that you will end up being that too. So it's okay. So I'm just gonna naturally assume that you're just gonna turn my way and just make him the most condescending cunt. The most condescending cunt to ever exist in this franchise. It doesn't.
And this is our protagonist.
Yeah, and I can't tell why Flynn is doing this, because it seems like.
To tie it back to his writing problems, I think what it is I think what was his greatest strength has now become his greatest weakness, which is that he's like, shit, what do I do with like the game cast? Because I'm not going to make like an exploratory, like adventurous characters. He loves the darkness stuff. So then he went, okay, well, what's a question I can ask? Because that's what he was always doing, was what would Knuckles do if he lost his dad? Or what are the consequences of this thing or this idea? And he went, okay, why do Sonic and so he went, what would it be like if you had someone who looked up to Eggman and they realized that Eggman is actually not this great villain? And then so we do that. That was an interesting idea he thought he had. And then for this, he thought, why does Sonic keep letting Eggman go? I think that's what it is that he kept. It's either that, or honestly, I think the simplest answer is that he had the Mr. Tinker plot, didn't think it out properly. And then, as you can tell, he's constantly replying basically to the fans in the comic. Mm-hmm. And so I think what happened is that he's just been digging the grave deeper and deeper. And he didn't either realize he was doing it, and he just thought like, okay, this time when I write like this line, that's going to seal the deal and we won't have to talk about it anymore. And it just made it worse and worse and worse and worse and worse.
And the worst part is he can't admit that this is his perspective. He constantly loves to deflect blame, not just to Sega, but even in this situation, he goes like, well, this is just what Sonic is. This is just who Sonic is. And I'm like, no, motherfucker, this is how you write this character. And
yeah, you put it into the character to make it an explicit thing he talks about. Like, you know, like if Sonic just acted this way, then that would be different from him. Like, it is his theology. This is what he believes, you know, like he says they are my principles. So this isn't just like, oh, the vibes were off. This is like, no, I firmly believe that like it's right for me to like condescend at you and be like, you know what, you can like kill as many people as possible, whether he explicitly thinks that or not. He is saying cause as much problem as you want. I'll win in the end, so it's fine. But it's like, God, Sonic, just because you're okay in the end doesn't mean everyone else is okay. And canonically, people died. So that's what just makes it so weird, is that you can't even like deflect in a way of like cartoon logic of like in Sonic Unleashed, sure, Eggman like blows up the planet, but like I'm pretty sure nobody fell into the abyss and died. because the tone of that game is not like that, right?
No.
It's like, oh, there's monsters out at night. They're scary, right? You know? But that's not what this comic is doing. This comic is making that explicit. And again, it's a combination of Flynn asking like the wrong questions about a character when he doesn't have anything to give them that's like uplifting or fun. It's him leaning into this darkness side that he loves doing. And then it's just him kind of like doubling down on these ideas and just kind of replying to fans and just making basically the most dislikable version of Sonic possible.
And the worst part is, his fan base is too sycophantic to ever be willing to push back against it. They just end up rolling with it, just try to rationalize as much as possible. Even when you end up even if you do get to the point of pointing out how this doesn't make sense, they can't be willing to accept that this doesn't make sense because they're the worst kind of fans. And I'm not making this up. They've told me this, that they have based their entire sense of self and their own personalities off of this particular branch of the franchise. So they feel the need to have to defend it with any type of way possible, even when stuff doesn't make sense. So,
well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Well, and I was going to say, to finish off this part before we get to the last page, I wanted to say that one of the final things to point out is that Sonic's morality thing here, other than Daniel Barnes, when he stepped in, has never been proven to work under Flynn's pen. In fact, every time Flynn writes Sonic to have this morality thing, he is proven wrong. The whole point, like every conflict he has where Sonic is like, oh, like I'm going to have this conflict, he never saves a single person ever. So the idea is what's making it weird is that, again, Flynn is not validating what could be a positive message about giving people second chances, because nobody gets a second chance because they're all Sega mandated to be evil forever. So, and the only character who this could work on is Surge, and Sonic is still being a jerk to him. And this leads into my final point, which is that this is how far Flynn has fallen. He has now been Flynned himself, because you have Evan Stanley coming into the book, and she clearly seemed to realize that Sonic was an asshole, because during issue 50, you were back then, you were debating with people were saying like, no, Sonic's not an asshole for this, right? Like Sonic is not, like Sonic's right. These are like, he's good, you know, like him saying this to Surge is in character, and like, you know, it's all working out. If I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Or at the very least, people were saying like it's an interesting idea to explore and that there's some gray area. It's not Sonic's complete asshole for this. And so Evan Stanley comes in, and I don't know what she was on about, but she just decided, you know what? Everyone's right. Sonic is an asshole, because what we leaned into is Surge gets consumed by her hatred for Sonic and what he said to her and all the stuff he did to her. And basically we have a whole story where the final issue is in the top left. Tails says to Kit, who feels very hurt and very betrayed. He says, hey, you know this is wrong. You don't want to kill people. And then he goes, hey, Sonic will fix this. Count on it. And then what is the end of the story? The end of the story is that Sonic is begging with Surge, and I don't have it. I have it down here. He says, what happened to you guys was seriously heinous. I get that now. So Sonic is admitting that before he was being dismissive of Surge. When Surge says, like, she explicitly says to Sonic, like, oh, he made me, and he, like, you know, all these things, and they've ruined my life, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So he is saying, like, I was kind of like taking that for granted. Oopsies, I thought you were joking. And so he goes, what happened to you was seriously heinous. I get that. And then so she's like, do you think, well, that'll be better that we're friends? Because again, Sonic has burned, rightfully, or like to her, rightfully, burned all the bridges to like any of her goodwill. And so like she is trying to kill Sonic because she, you know, feels programmed to. She's like getting, you know, doped up on all the thing and overpowering and overloading or whatever. And so the story ends. Again, I remind you of the top left. Sonic will fix it. Count on it. And instead what happens is that Surge basically like kills herself. She like overloads and she passes out. And then Surge has to, and then she's going to get taken by like Metal Sonic or whatever. And so Kit has to come in and basically says like, no, guys, like none of you really care about us. You just want us. You want to see how you can change us, what you can turn us into to prove that you're right. Well, I'm sick of it. I'm leaving. And so the story ends. Evan Stanley ends the story by showing that no, Sonic isn't going to make this right. Sonic could not save this person. They were so consumed that it basically killed them. And then their friend had to step in and be like, Sonic, get away from my friend. You were hurting them. And that's the end of the story. So, which is, now we're not going to get into like how that's just bad for Sonic's character, obviously, because he has to continue being the protagonist, right? But it is so funny how we've gotten to a point where Evan Stanley is basically writing a critique of Flynn's portrayal of Sonic and saying, no, you are the villain. Or at the very least is saying, no, Sonic, like, you messed up this time, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, that's what this story is saying. And obviously it doesn't go anywhere because then when Surge and Kit come back, I think Flynn's writing, and it's just like, oh, they were just like hanging out in a base and they're hungry, so now they're going to come in and cause shenanigans, and maybe finally they will become good guys, right? We'll see what happens, right? But for this story, this is the narrative that was going on for the like expanding from Starline and all that, and it's just so weird that this is what Sonic's character is when Sonic is not being Sonic, quote unquote, just doing his normal thing. His story is about defending whether or not you should kill evil people. And I don't know why that's his conflict in the first place. But
I do. You actually hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, go for it.
It's partially what you said before about how much Flynn loves to revel in just like being dark and cynical, but it's also his bad habit of always wanting to be meta and trying to address stuff, not only in terms of addressing fans, but trying to address things in the meta. Like going back to what you said before, why he definitely wanted to try to ask, like, why does Sonic always let Eggman go? And he thinks the only way he can rationalize this is by having Sonic get this mindset that's even worse than the cartoonish Batman one, where it's like, oh, I think every guy deserves a second chance, even if you ignore all the times where he clearly doesn't, or leaves it between like the storybook games where he does end up more or less killing people. Or the number of times he's left Eggman for dead. Even if you ignore all that stuff, the ultimate answer is Eggman's the franchise villain. There is no in-universe reason. There's no in-universe reason for it. The actual reason is Eggman is around. Eggman is always around because he's the franchise villain for it. I'm not wild about that, but you don't try to rationalize that in store. I'm not wild about that answer. But the correct answer to solve that universe is to have Sonic beat him and take Eggman out permanently and move on to new villains. Not try to find a way to rationalize that in story.
Or just don't mention it and don't make Eggman like literally the devil.
Yes. That's the correct answer. Do what Boom did, where he is just slightly more of an annoyance than he's just your typical Saturday morning cartoon villain. He's your Team Rocket. He's your Draken. He's your Doofenshmirtz. He's an annoyance. The characters need to deal with him, but he's not going to cause any genocides anytime soon. And
or you could do what the adventure games did, which is that Eggman shoots for the moon and then we stop him before he actually causes problems. And so it's kind of like a very like adventure-y, like B movie, like that, that's our big bad guy. Like Magneto almost destroyed the planet, right? But we stopped him or whatever. Now he can come back for another movie. Like you disconnect from the idea of like, which you can't do anymore because forces exist. And that's all on Sega in the first place. Yeah. But like, it's just screwed any way you look at it, but he didn't have to look at it. He didn't have to point it out, No,
he didn't.
And it feels like this is, I would say we can land on this. I would say if you want to track the rise and fall of Ian Flynn, it is the idea of basically a writer who came into a book that was tonally very dark. And he, through, I would say, his skill, managed to find ways to justify continuing that darkness and trying to tell stories that basically ask the questions of how do you get through that darkness. And he did that a lot with the characters. And by the end of it, he really wanted to then lean into creating his own dark stories. And, he basically got pulled out of that at the very end and basically just kind of became its own thing out of his hands. Then that kind of translated into his other problems in Reboot, which is less about the dark stuff and more about his inability to really like craft like personalities and stories lines for a lot of these characters outside of just like a general, like, oh, they're the leader or they're a fighter or they have a bit of a quirk or whatever. And he doesn't really want to do anything like that. And then you get to IDW, which is kind of the culmination of basically kind of not having basically the willpower anymore. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean, after, 2 cancellations, he doesn't really have the willpower anymore to like create these long lasting like narratives. So he's just like, oh, I'll just take it one step at a time. I can do a little bit with the OCs and lean into the dark aspects that I want to. And then also I can just kind of triple down on like any of these ideas I have because there's nothing else I'm going to tell a story about. And that's kind of where we end up at. I think that what Flynn's first, basically the thing that got him into the comics and what made him really valuable to a world like Archie is now the thing that, combined with a lot of his other flaws and his kind of lack of like his comedy's kind of gone. I think he's just kind of ran out of jokes and ideas. And, he's been writing this series for like over like 15 years at this point, right? You got to be running out of steam at that point, especially if you're resetting and resetting and resetting. And I just think that it's like, man, I don't think he needs to be the head writer, and he hasn't been the head writer, and we've moved on to other people. But I just think that people shouldn't be surprised that his current stuff is like this, however he writes in the games or however he writes in, future comics or whatever. And I just also wanted to point out that I think Flynn did have a lot of really good strengths, but his strengths were real. Like, I think Flynn's best role would be as an editor. I think he has an editor brain where like he would come in and be like, here's all these cool ideas you can use. go for it writer with a vision, right? And he used to be that writer with a vision because he was a fan of all those things and he had things to work off of. And now as all that's been stripped away, he's kind of left as a hollow husk defending a character who's basically being like, oh, we should let dictators live. And his response to that is, well, like, it's a kid's comic. We're not going to have the meaning of life in it. Whatever. Which also shows that he doesn't really care about it that much. So that's my wrap up. You can go now.
No, I think you just kind of hit it. Like, when it comes to Flynn, I've never been a big fan of his work. And honestly, the problem I've always had with him is that the further away we get from his work in Preboot, the less it seems like he gives a shit to try to say anything with his work. And more specifically, how much he just kind of gives more and more into the idea of just making things miserable, making his stories tragedy porn, and just making things.
Or vapid fan service.
Yes, or vapid fan service. And honestly, I'm going to take a step further that not only do I not think he should be an editor, because just recently he ended up putting out a video that someone asked, like, hey, did you give up? There were so many like different contradictions in Prime. Why weren't you like a consultant for that? Like, what happened? And you go like, oh yeah, I made a bunch of notes about like why Prime, about the problems that Prime had when it came to fitting in the main continuity, but they just kind of all ignored it. And that I really wish they had listened to me a lot more. Like, you can bring the horse of water, but you can't make it drink. And honestly, I don't think you should do that, because if we can make a video about this at some point, I will, but this will be much later, is this franchise, and especially the fan base, needs to move away from the idea of trying to make everything canon, because you are not going to gain anything, because that's a bad thing to do in general for any franchise, because you end up restricting how much each story can build and work on its own. Like, IDW could potentially have, I don't think would have done it well, but it could have worked better with the idea of its of utilizing Flynn's cynical mindset if it was meant to exist in its own and have its own mechanics build on and try to make everything work with that. But when you try taking his very vapid take on cynicism and applying that to the game world, it kind of reveals how much of how shallow his attempts at trying to apply this are, especially when it comes to trying to address like, why does the comedic supervillain always allowed to exist and never get killed or put in jail? Maybe we should try evaluating that towards Sonic. But he only applies it to Sonic and not literally anyone else, because even when Sonic ends up answering this, he never Sonic ends up getting his position on this, but no one else really pushes back on this other than SBO and Shadow, which you think there would be more than two characters who would push against that when it's like, all of them end up getting put away. But I digress. The main thing about him is I don't even think he should be an editor at this point. I think he should just be kind of left to be, hey, what's a way to make sure that we kind of stay relatively on brand, and just leave him as a lore consultant. Because leave him as a lore consultant.
Maybe give him like a classic spinoff or something. Just jokes.
no, I don't even think we both just read that Knack mini story. I think we can both agree.
That's true. Yeah.
Can't do that anymore. I got in trouble for saying this on Twitter. He needs to go and work on a project that is not connected to a franchise. He needs to work on some type of TV show, some type of Netflix show, or some type of comic that is meant to exist that's meant to exist on its own. You can't utilize any more references, and in particular, references for other stuff, and needs to exist as standalone. But more specifically, he needs to work with other writers, because he has a lot of bad habits I feel would have been sanded off of him if he got to work in a proper writer's room and had to learn from.
Yeah, I mean, like if his first job wasn't literally Archie.
Yeah, but when his first job was Archie, he was basically made into the head writer. Granted, he had editors, I think, did a good job of maintaining him in a couple places, but he never had to like properly work off of other professional writers to understand, I have to give characters motivations. This is the point of actually having a rival. This is the point of like what an adventure story is supposed to be about. I never thought of it that way. And
because Preboot was just already like structurally its own thing, its own weird thing, and so he just kept making it its own weird thing, and was basically just tasked with like just write character storylines. You didn't really have to worry about like a plot, because at that point it's just like, I mean, and usually like his plots, whenever you like break them down, they're very simple. It's just like, oh, like new bad guy, right? And then like the thing he like, and then he just kind of focuses on the character stuff. Whereas like once he was stripped of all that and all the stuff he could pull from, it just became more and more like, oh wow, there's really nothing here. I don't care. You know, it's exposition, or it's just like, oh look, like the character had an abusive dad, kind of ish. Whatever, moving on. You know, like he didn't have, he didn't, you know, whatever you can say about Penders. Penders stuffed in as much humanity as possible into his stuff. I would say way too much and not in any way eloquent, but you can tell that man put like his life, like passion blood into it, because he did not give a shit about Knuckles. He just wanted to tell stories he cared about. So like whenever Flynn's pulling from that, like he can take that. He can take these like very human tales or whatever. And even like the reason like the melodrama happened with Sonic and Sally was that Ken was like, okay, well, I need to get readers reading this because like the comic's not doing too well. So therefore I'm going to do like emotional drama with the characters because that's what people will tune in for. So like even like Penders understood, even on a superficial level, like that kind of thing and like what people cared about, which was like the characters. Whereas like Flynn, when he went for the superficial level, it was like what people care about is like the references, or, and I would say at the end of Preboot, he did start leaning into that Penders mindset, you know, of like, oh, they want to see like drama, they want to see like bad things happening and go, oh no, I got to tune in next week, you know. And then again, he kind of lucked out of it. But yeah, like yeah, so I think I would say, which I mean, that's like the biggest insult you could give him, which is like he eventually became Penders, and Evan Stanley had to become your Ian Flynn.
Honestly, I think I could take it a little step further than that. I'm not saying that, again, I know a lot of people think I hate the man. I don't. I don't think he has a lot of good work on here, but I don't have any like personal gripes towards him, anything about this. But I will say this. I think he does need to just step away from Sonic for a good while, because he is honestly starting to show that, because like there's no way that anyone can write a script like Metal Virus or any of that stuff unless you are either completely have your head up your own ass and you don't understand how people function and how emotions work, or two, he is just so lost the ability to give a shit that he doesn't understand, that he doesn't really use as a chance to actually refine his work. Either way, this is someone who doesn't, and considering the fact that he does clearly want to go off and do his own work, which I assume most people who are working for franchises want to do at some point.
Yeah, I mean, he's been with this series for forever. I think he's really coasting at this point.
Yeah, so
which I would do, and at that point, I should move on to something else.
No, same. Like, again, I have no ill will towards him. Like, I wouldn't like.
He's also like the most patient. I think he's like the most patient man I've ever seen. Like, I think the fact that he is only now recently starting to be even slightly snippy is like a testament to it. Like the fact that he hasn't like ripped a Sonic fan's head off. Like he gets like, he gets.
I know some of the stupid shit he gets.
He gets like paid to be yelled at. You know.
Yes. But I do think it is time for him to go work for something else. It is time for him to, if he wants to be a lore consultant, that's fine. But it's time for him to just go off and work on something else entirely. I mean, not just the comics. I mean, the games too, because we're already seeing this problem in Frontier. Like, I brought this back up with Frontiers. The whole thing with that, especially when it came to Tales, is, hey, will be a good game next time. Maybe we'll see. And we don't really get, and it's again just kind of reveling in this kind of very cynical, dreary mindset that was Frontiers. But then when we end up getting to the character work, it's like it's non-existent, and it only just says like, we might end up building on this stuff later. And before,
and I mean, he even said, he's like, if I, you know, like I don't expect like, oh, I'm going to be the one to write the next game. I put that in there, so maybe whoever writes the next game, you know, if it's not me or someone else, maybe they will pick it up. You know, so like he's not even like, oh, this is like some big plan. He's just like, I just planted seeds and I hope someone will do something with them.
Yeah, which is the biggest sign that someone does need, because to go to a Doctor Who example, because it was a much worse example. It was a much worse case of that, but they did something relatively similar with the Doctor beforehand, and that was the sign that writer needed to go. Because if you are going to be on an action fantasy project like this, you live or die on the project, depending on how much you have by your vision, by how much you want to try showing what you can do with this property. And if you are so stuck in the mindset that the only thing you feel you can do is just, I'll introduce this idea and maybe someone will pick it up later, that's a sign that you don't have anything to say, and that's a sign that you don't really need to be on this project in the first place. Like, for all the problems that people that I've said about Prime, that we both said about Prime, I'll definitely say I'd rather see more Primes. I'd rather see another Prime than IDW, because Prime, for all of its problems, was trying to explore its own ideas. It didn't do it well, but it was ultimately trying to do its own idea and fit the tone that was ultimately going for. Flynn's work doesn't do that, and it usually causes more problems than it solves. So I think if he can go off and work on something else, not Star Fox, but go off and work on, like, I don't know, Stranger Things season 7 or whatever, or some type of like standalone show that's popping up right now, or some type of standalone comic, that would be the best for him. Especially because, like, I don't think he understands like why Drogon failed, because he just kind of thinks like, oh, it's because he has a bunch of Sonic fans. But Sonic fans do have more than one interest. The problem is the fan base he's collected is mainly Sonic fans that just want Sonic content that references itself. So even if Drogon was the greatest thing of all time, which it's not, he was always going to struggle getting his fan base to latch onto it, because it's a fan base that doesn't really care about anything else other than just Sonic, that values Sonic.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, but hey, I would say at the end of the day, like, I will always love Preboot and what Flynn did with that. I would say with Preboot, I would recommend it if you just want to see some really cool, crazy Sonic fan fiction, basically. And I say fan fiction in like the most endearing way, actually. In that case. In Reboot, I would say I would give it like one read. I think you will find at least one universe arc in there that's probably fun, or or like I would say like the Champions arc and the Chaotix arc at the end are just like a blast. They're just super funny reads. And I would say, like, again, just reading it once, I think you'll have a good time, just because everything will be new to you. And it might just be fun to see those old characters again in that way. To me, like, Reboot is what I kind of wish IDW was as a baseline, in terms of like combining all of the franchises, like, details, and making like a cool, like, weird, cohesive world out of it. Obviously, like, I would want it executed really well, but I mean, just like in concept, I really like that. And then that's why I would say IDW, like, I just wouldn't recommend it. Like, I think IDW is like, at its best, it's just like cotton candy, where like you put it in your mouth and go, oh, that's sweet, and then it fades, and then like for the rest of the day, maybe you're going like, wow, I can't believe Super Silver was in a comic, and then you never think about it again. So it's not, I wouldn't really recommend IDW. Although if you're watching this, you've definitely watched or read IDW, so all you would really need convincing is Preboot and Reboot. So hey, Ian Flynn, he's been with the series, like, he's obviously the most prolific writer. Mad props to the man for sticking to it for this long, and for again putting up with Sonic fans for this long. He gets paid basically to get yelled at. He's a very patient, kind man, but at the end of the day, I do think he should move on to something else. And it was really fun to basically track his progress, because I just think it's fascinating and interesting. So yeah, please in the comments give us any of your thoughts on like Flynn and his writing style, and just anything you have to say about it, because I think it's just interesting to talk about. He is nothing but fascinating.
Yes, indeed.
So hey man, thank you so much for basically letting me have this entire show.
Not a problem at all, man. I got to learn a little bit more about Flynn's work. Still don't like him, but I still don't like his work, but I value having this whole collection here all at once.
All right.
So yeah, thank you for this.
No problem. All right. Well, we'll probably see you guys next time, and you can close this out. Thanks for having me. I'm IanWaffles. You can find me on IanWaffles on Twitter and YouTube. And close this out, love.
All right. And just because YouTube seems to like it when people do this, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. You can find me on everything find me pretty much on everything at LaviCast. And I will see you guys in the next one. See ya.
Peace.